Now, Vicki, done. You got it.
You got it in just in time.
I did. Vicki puts that up to remind me to hit the button. All right. So we'll have some various discussions about, where we're at as a committee, legislative and budget update and office updates from both our Ag and Seasonal Workforce Services Office and the Workforce Services Division. At that point, we'll take our break and grab some lunch real quick, and we'll come back and talk about what the next couple of years are going to look like. I have a couple ideas I'd like to share with the committee. We're going to talk about some changes to H2A inspections, TWH inspections. We also have our new state monitor advocate position now filled by Arturo Espinosa. We'll give him a few minutes to chat with us. And then we've got updates on prevailing wage and hand harvester survey and the state of the agriculture economy that we will be chatting through. And then we will work to get out of here on time, if not earlier, and send our travelers on their way.
The guest Wi-Fi login, it's up here on the board. It's number 4, followed by the word Rainier in lowercase.
Yes. If you're in the room, that's our Wi-Fi password for the business. Okay, Kim.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am really thrilled to get to have this time with all of you today and look forward to it being a conversation. We are marking 6 years since the legislature created and established our Agricultural and Seasonal Workforce Services Office and the Advisory Committee, which is a significant milestone. And I think we all know that the agricultural industry and workers are really a vital part of the global economy. And I really appreciate the work that you all do to support agricultural workers and businesses through the work together. I'm also really incredibly proud of the work that Bertha and her team have done in the ASWS office in the last year. And I always want to talk about a little bit about those numbers because I think they've really grown over time. We processed 444 H2A applications for 36,350 workers. And we conducted over 500 site visits to go make sure that we're delivering information about that program, about the rules, about the assurances that need to be made for approximately 33,000, well over 33,000 H2A workers and US-based workers. We also, in conjunction with our Workforce Services Division, placed 30 domestic farm workers, and that has also resulted in us doing 100% field checks with those sites. We handled a record 138 complaints and apparent violations related to the H2A regulations, employment law, safety, health, and 79% of those were resolved immediately. And that's a really, I think, important component of that work. This office has become much more efficient and implemented a lot more automated processes and has grown over time, which of course not only reduced costs, but it really made sure that we could handle peak season, and we did that well. We were able to implement legislation to collect data on farms with enhanced cooperation across state agencies. I know that's been a focus for us and how we do this collaboratively with our partnerships with the Department of Health, Labor, and Industries. And we have, that includes updates to the temporary working housing. Maybe I need another cup of coffee.
There's plenty.
I know,
Okay.
a whole bucket full, MOU. And so that cross-agency coordination has really been enhanced. That partnership extends the worker and business representatives around the table, and your counsel and help is really appreciated in all of that. I think this committee has really been an excellent forum to transparently talk about and discuss the opportunities and challenges related to the H2A program and your guidance on how ESD can really continue to best conduct that work is really important to us. We also you all have put together and we've submitted some excellent reports that I think are really valuable to the legislature. Bertha and her team just recently had a meeting with Labor and Commerce Committee Chair Senator Slavanya, along with others. She, along with others in the legislature, just really do understand the importance about your work, and I think that's really important too. So I just want to take a minute to thank you for a great 6-year partnership between the agency. We look forward to really continuing that and building that out in the years to come, and that's the commitment we have. And that's what I really wanted to mostly to say today. I'm happy to talk about anything on your mind or answer your questions if you have them. We also have our Workforce Services Division Director, Deputy Director here, and help with the teams that are out in our workforce offices. So I think there's a lot of different dimensions that are represented in the
We just finished the legislative session. I think a lot of us are still sorting through everything that was done. Do you have any updates on resources for the agency, and will there be any effect on ASWS office? Well, I know we're all watching with concern the federal staff reductions, worried about capacity for a very timeline driven program, and it would be helpful to know how you see resources.
Yeah, that is a fantastic. Hi, Mike. How are you? Nice to see you. Thanks for making the journey. So in terms of resources, I think I will say Employment Security Department all up has had reduction in budget, and it's come from a number of places. We saw a glide path with federal funding that was related to a lot of the investment that happened during COVID, one-time grants. Going back to last summer, we actually froze hiring in anticipation of wanting the workers that we brought in to the extent possible in whatever way, and to have whatever additional reductions that we might be able to anticipate or not be able to be handled in the best way possible. So we preserved a lot of vacancies so that we could handle it through vacancy and attrition versus reduction of filled positions. As that has settled out in the way of the state reduction, we got it to a very small number, proportionately within our budget, and it didn't include ASWS. We are there is a vacancy that we're gonna take on there. We are cautious about the federal side. We are about 60% federally funded. We have a tendency on how that current budget gets allocated. We don't know exactly what that is yet. We don't have a lot of capacity in what we consider our flexible funding. So a lot of we have some near general state fund money. A lot of that got allocated a lot of ways to preserve general state funds, which makes a lot of sense in this current budget environment. And we don't have wiggle room. So we are, I think, poised with all the work we've done to be able to respond to those the best way possible. But it's a really tight situation with our budget. So that's what I'll say about that. And Josh is our government relations director. So I don't know if you have anything to add just about the legislative outcomes or anything additional on the budget side that you think I overlooked. I'd be happy to.
Yeah, there were some positive came out of the budget as far as the ASWS office. And Dan will provide a little bit more detail a little bit later on. There were a few bills that kind of hit the topics that the committee covered. We'll talk about those in detail a little bit going forward. Some that will have some periphery impact, like a bill that kind of brought in kind of a state level of the Warren Act for like different layoffs, which were starting to stand up. So it might have some impacts on some of the employers and workers. Some of the bills that we've been working on for a few years, looking at unemployment for excluded workers. Continue to make progress this year. There's a lot of people involved in that conversation, looking at different funding mechanisms and different policy options. So we expect that to come back next year and continue that conversation. But all in all, I just kind of want to, Cammy mentioned it earlier, but Bert and the team had a chance to connect with Senator Saldana Wednesday, and we're really excited to get more of the visibility with the team in front of the members, so that and she asked the golden question right there at the end, like, what resources do we need? So if they're asking us, it gives us well positioned to continue talking about the work and what we need to do it. So it's a slow process. It doesn't happen overnight, but I'm pretty excited about where we're positioned to continue to build the office's capacity.
Commissioner, just as an employee of the Department of Ag, and as an employee of the Department of Ag, our agency supports the ag industry, but also as a person that used to work here at ESD, I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done with your programs. It is a great improvement since I've been here, where we struggled with the H-2A program in being able to serve the employer, but also serve the workers that were here locally and the workers that were coming in. I think it's a vast improvement since I've been here. So I want to thank you for the work that you and your staff have done.
Thank you for that. That means a lot to me. And I will just say that we have such an amazing team. It's really my honor to get to support their great work. And I think really committed to how we do that collectively, knowing that this is a system, right? And in workforce, there are a lot of parts and pieces and players. And so from my perspective, it's important that we do that in a way that is both transparent and serves across the needs of that system. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I just will say Bertha and her team have been absolutely phenomenal. So that has made that pretty easy for me.
So commissioners,
Yeah.
thank you for being here. Even in listening to that, just want to reiterate from the labor side, we're not anywhere near where we need to be.
Mhm.
Advances have been made, but there's still a lot that needs to get done. So definitely this committee is really important to keep that momentum moving forward. We've got a long ways to go.
We do, and I
From the
agree.
supporters. Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Should have started by saying congratulations on you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we say that every day we work.
You know, I will say, I'm really grateful in this moment to be reappointed. There's a lot happening. And I think a lot about how fortunate I am that we have an experienced team that gets to continue the momentum. And we don't have to shake up thinking about a new leader sort of vision or plan for how we do that. I think there's so much other turbulence that to be able to keep it steady and move forward is going to be really critical right now.
I just wanted to add, thank you everyone for being here, that I am very proud of the program, the H-2A. Back in 2004, there was only 4 applications with 483 workers requested. As Commissioner Cammy said, that we are at 444 this 2024. So it's a big difference from 483 workers requested back in 2004 to over 36,000 in 2024. So wanted to mention it.
You all know that I always forget something from the agenda. That's just the way I run. And I ran right past the roundtable introductions. So
She was so excited.
I know, right? I was. I just went boom. So y'all know that I apologize. I think Cammy has sufficiently introduced herself. I think you all know me, Joy Adams, Chair for the Committee, Employment System Policy Director. How about Arturo?
Arturo Espinoza, State Monitor Advocate.
Isaac Cavazos, Public Actions and Campaign for C2C.
Nice to meet you. And I'm Rosalinda Guillen, Community to Community Development. Labor Representative, Farm Worker Representative.
Caitlin Gates, Labor and Industries Deputy Policy Director.
John DeVane, Washington State Tree Fruit Association.
Ignacio Marquez with the Washington State Department of Ag.
Alberto Isordia, Assistant Director for Workforce Services.
Ish Maidagi, Workforce Services Director.
Maria Seguenza, Director for the Commission on Hispanic Affairs. Here's a guest.
Dan Zeitlin, Chief of Staff here at ESD.
Josh Dye, Government Relations Director here at ESD.
Carlos Sandoval-Larios, ASWS Compliance Specialist located in the Auburn and Skagit Workforce offices.
Petra Meraz, Foreign Labor Program Supervisor at ESD.
I'm Susana Rodriguez. I am the new supervisor for the ASWS team, and thank you.
Nice to see you. Michelle Bessel, attorney with Northwest Justice Project and labor rep.
Rebecca Clayton, Director of ASWS.
Ariel Higgins, Labor Industries Community Relations Director.
Mike Gempler, Washington Growers League, and with Grower Representative on the committee.
I'm sure. Jared Nelson, Executive Services Coordinator. I support the ESG folks here.
And I'm Gerald Gabar, Deputy Director under Joy.
All right.
Some folks online or no?
Yes, let's go to online folks. Scott?
Joy, we have one committee member that's online.
Oh, okay. Who is that?
Juan?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Juan Gomez Briseño, and I am the section manager overseeing our temporary worker housing program here at the Washington State Department of Health, Office of Environmental Health and Safety.
Excellent. Thank you, Juan. And we have some staff members from the team and some guests listening into the meeting. All right. So let's go ahead. I believe next we have Dan Zeitlin with his presentation.
Should I stay here, Joy? It makes sense for me to sit there.
Honestly, the
either way.
camera's off. The audio is probably going to pick you up better there.
This is good right here. Okay, awesome. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be back with this committee. Again, my name is Dan Zeitlin, and I'm Chief of Staff here at ESD. I used to have Joy's role and chaired this committee up until a couple years ago. So again, it's great to be back, and just to echo what Cammie said, looking back on 6 years, I know we at ESD and hopefully everyone in this room is proud of the work this committee has done, helping guide us to stand up the ASWS office and implement the work, navigating a global pandemic, and much more. And again, I think a lot of good work to reflect on, and to Rosalinda's good point, a lot of important work ahead of us. I was asked to speak here today as we sort of reflect on 6 years and look at the committee going forward, to talk about or remind the committee about what our charge is here, and talk about expectations and how we engage in these meetings. So I want to do that. I'm happy to open up the floor for any conversation. As Cammie alluded to, like, one important thing to remember is that the legislature and the statute that created the ASWS office and this advisory committee made it clear that it's in the public interest to provide adequate protections for foreign and domestic workers and provide education and outreach opportunities to help growers maintain the stable workforce they need. That is the intent of the statute, and that is sort of the general framework in which we operate. In the statute, the committee further is charged, this committee is charged with providing comment on department rulemaking, policies, and initiatives, as well as charged with studying issues the committee determines require consideration in relation to the H-2A temporary agricultural program. And so we all know that everybody in this room brings different perspectives to the H-2A program. And that's healthy and that's good. And that's why we're together. And that's why I think we're an important body in helping that program be as effective as it can be. But it's important to just remember the underlying premise of that is that the H-2A program, it exists, it's here. And we at ESD with our partners are here to operate that program. And so it's the role of this committee to advise ESD, DOH, LNI, agriculture, the state government on how to improve domestic recruitment, be part of the program. We talk about that in the report we issue to the legislature every couple of years, and advise us on how to effectively administer the H-2A program and provide oversight of the program. So that is the charge of this committee, and all those statistics that Cami spoke to reflect that work. All the applications processed, all of the complaints handled, all of the site visits, all of the field checks, improving domestic recruitment. Those are all aspects of the program, and this committee is here to advise us as we conduct that work. So that's just, again, the framework that I think is important that we all remember that we're operating in when we are having conversations in this committee. And carrying out these duties, regular attendance is important. Regular attendance by committee members and active engagement in the discussion. I recall from my time here, and I'm sure it's still the same, that we are in an ongoing dialogue on a whole range of issues from meeting to meeting. So being at each meeting, being actively engaged, digesting the information being provided, engaging in conversation. It all sort of just goes from one meeting to the next on similar topics, whether that be housing topics or information data related to how the program is operating, oversight activities, how domestic recruitment is going. These are all sort of they change a bit, but the same sort of topics. So it's important to be here and to be actively engaged as part of the commitment to be a member on this committee. And I know that our team at ESD and our partners at other agencies put a lot of work into these meetings and providing as much good information as possible and having the right people around the table to provide agency input into the conversation. At the same time, we know that life happens, that you all have jobs and other things going on as well. And members can't always make the meeting, and we have in our charter language around proxies or substitutes for when people can't attend. Per that charter, any member may designate a regular alternative or proxy to serve on the board in his or her place, and that person has the same authority as the member when he or she is unable to attend a meeting. And so just a word on those proxies, that means that they're there to substitute for you when you can't be here, to speak on your behalf, to take action on your behalf. They're also welcome to come to all the meetings and should, so that they're well educated when they do have to fill in. But when you're here and your proxy is here, you are here to speak, you are here to take actions. Your proxy is here to listen and, essentially as a part of the public and comment during the public comment period, but that's their role. So just wanted to make sure that was clear. So again, just a reminder why we're here. We're here to work together to make the H-2A program, domestic recruitment, H-2A program administration, oversight, other aspects work as effectively as possible to serve workers, to serve businesses. We're all committed to this work. We're all committed to terms, and we can only function effectively. This committee can only give good advice and help agencies take positive actions if members are regularly attending, regularly engaged, and having proxies here is great. It expands the space of people who have good knowledge about the program. And that allows it to carry on. But again, as a reminder, they're here to listen and can engage as part of the public if you're here. And then if you're not, obviously they're sitting in and they're acting on your behalf. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions about our committee, our charge, or any of those expectations. Mike.
Isn't it true that this committee looks at everything that has to do with the intersection of the Employment Security Department and seasonal agricultural workers? Is that overstating it? I mean, because anything with unemployment, emergency services, anything that ESD might do with agricultural workers, we talk about on this committee, I believe. Not just I don't want to focus exclusively on the H-2A programs.
I mean, I think we are charged with really looking at anything that has to do with the way in which the agency workers. So in the report, for example, when we're talking about the budget, we get pretty expansive. And in fact, later today, when I guess next, when Josh and I are up, we're going to give like a big picture about the budget because it matters. And yes, all things employment services in particular, and to some extent UI ultimately touch on the agriculture sector generally and agriculture workers specifically. And I guess I would tie that back to domestic workers, helping domestic agriculture workers work in agriculture, have first offers of those jobs as part of the H-2A program, and then more broadly helping agriculture workers. Let's talk about later with Arturo, have access to the same employment opportunities as other Washingtonians. But I think my main point there is just to remind the committee that, again, we're coming in with different perspectives on these topics, but our charge is not to debate whether the H-2A program or ESD's migrant seasonal farm worker program or other programs we operate should or should not exist. It's to make those programs work as effectively as possible for workers.
I think Mike has a good question that, I mean, sometimes it's so hard to just stay within our sort of sandbox because we feel like, oh, it's all about H-2A and it's all about domestic workers, but there's so much more than that. And it's just hard for us to find those sort of sideboard, I guess. And so far, I think that the things that this committee has done are things that needed to happen. I mean, during COVID, it was like nothing had to do. COVID didn't seem like it had to do with H-2A, but the committee had to do something around that I guess that event. So that kind of pushed us or pushed the committee to do more beyond that because it was important work. Moving forward, it's like, where do we find those lines where it's like, okay, well, this is sort of related to ag and related to farm workers, but not really. So it's just hard to find those areas.
Right, exactly. And that actually is something that I want to talk about after right after lunch, have that space on Chair's vision. And that was one of the questions that I had for the group. So I've made a note that we can circle back to it. Thank you for bringing that up.
That was quite a time, Ignacio. I will say about the pandemic itself is one, you're right, and there was a lot going on. Again, certainly a period where not everybody agreed on everything, but I'm not aware of any other like state government advisory committee that existed at the time that dealt specifically with agriculture. And so our ability to work through issues from the beginning in terms of trying to keep workers safe and agriculture businesses functioning all the way through getting workers, whether they are H-2A workers or domestic workers, vaccinated was quite a ride, I think, for all of us. And I appreciate what Joy's saying. There are definitely aspects of that are just about ESD and about supporting agriculture workers and business that should endure. And then there were other aspects of that this was a good forum for labor and business representatives to get together and work through some unique, hopefully once in a lifetime.
It was the only forum, I thought, that really in the state that really allowed for that conversation to happen. And the committee didn't agree on everything, but it agreed that something had to be done.
Yeah, right. I think that in many cases, this intersection is actually about, and it proved true during the pandemic, but there have been other times in the agricultural industry where climate and other issues have literally, put us up against people's lives. There's a life and death situation where you have to get beyond, you almost have to get beyond just the law or what, it's a moral question. It's like, what are we going to do to save people's lives, whether they're domestic farm workers or H-2A workers? That's a human being at risk. And we have control. I believe we have control and ability to do something about it. So for us on the labor side, that's what it's about. It's about the human lives that are in danger. And it speaks to climate change, fires, smoke. There are issues where there's no disagreement that somebody could die if we don't pay attention to how the state or the agencies have structured the ability for farm workers to be able to survive. And I think, it goes that deep for us as farm workers. That's what we're here for, is to monitor and provide that oversight for our communities. Because we're farm worker communities. It's more than just the workers. Every worker has a family with children and that are participating in the community. And I think that's the context we as farm workers bring to the table. Can't forget about that. We won't, I guess. And
you shouldn't. I appreciate that. We followed up the pandemic with historic wildfires.
That's right.
I remember, again, I'm a couple years
Floods.
removed from the work, right, that this committee has done. And again, my point is not that, and to Joy's point earlier, it sounds like you all discussed what the right parameters are for the conversation for this group. And it's not to push back on that at all. When we have major fires, those are going to impact agricultural workers, whether they're from Washington, whether they're H-2A workers, it's going to affect employers. And if there are activities within the missions of ESD or LNI or DOH or Department of Ag that are relevant, we should talk about. All right. I think we're just continuing with maybe I get to pivot to Josh for a minute. I'll tee up this next one. All right. Well, to John Devaney's question earlier, we'll get a little more weedier on that question here with a legislative and budget update. I think I have a little agenda that I can, if you go to the next slide, Vicki, walk through, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Josh. So Josh is going to, kind of touched on it there earlier, but walk through a couple ESD related bills that we think are just relative for this committee to know about. And then we thought it'd be good to give sort of the high level and then get a little weedier perspective on what's going on with ESD's budget writ large. A component of that is familiar to this committee when we're talking about sources of funding like federal funding service or Wagner Pfizer funding, when we're talking about the foreign labor certification grant, when we're talking about money from the ASWS office. But it's important to remember that those federal funding sources and the ASWS office are supplemented or funded by state funds. So we wanted to just make sure this committee understood just sort of the big picture that Cami started to touch on earlier in terms of ESD's budget coming out of a leg session that while wasn't short of policy excitement in our space, in the end was as far as what we were highly proactively engaged in was around our funding. So I will stop there. Vicki, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll turn it over to Josh to speak to some bills before we get into the budget.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Did we end up with a quorum? Do we have a quorum?
Next year.
Oh, we have one. Okay, so, yes.
Success.
Quorum, Mike.
All right.
All right, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so the three bills that we kind of want to directly touch on, two passed and one did not. The first is engrossed second substitute, Senate Bill 5525, which was an employment loss due to closure or mass layoffs. The high version of this bill is it kind of gives a state version of the federal WARN Act. There are a few differences and a few other protections that the state now offers. And generally speaking, once the bill goes into effect, employers who are having mass layoffs or closures have to provide ESD with notice up front, provide their employees with notice up front. And there's also some other obligations around, some of their healthcare coverage, some of the benefits that need to continue on. ESD has enforcement, some little more teeth, if you will, to enforce the state version over the federal version. And we have already begun the process of implementation. It's going to be we've got a little bit of a runway. There's about a 17-month implementation timeline. We have started reaching out to several different stakeholders. We've been getting some folks contacting us that want to be a part of the implementation. As part of that, in this room, please, if you have interest in being a part of that, reach out to anybody on the committee, me, and let us know, and we'll be happy to. We always want as many voices in the room as possible when we're trying to take something from paper to reality. The second one, which took up a little bit of the air for ESD during legislative session, was unemployment benefits for striking workers. So Bill 5041 passed the legislature and was signed by the governor a couple of days ago. So it will allow for labor disputes or workers who are involved in a labor dispute are not automatically disqualified from unemployment insurance. They still have to meet all the other requirements. With a few exceptions, there are a group of or a cohort of employees that aren't required to do job search. It has to do with their connectedness with the employer, and the workers involved in a labor dispute fall into that category. One of the things to mention, and it got a little bit of attention during the floor and committee debates about that work search option. And one thing I just want to throw out philosophically, at least, is that is there for both for protection for the employers. And the thought behind it is, from both the federal level and the way that ESD implements it here in the state, is for short-term work stoppages, whether it's standby, say, the plant is closing down to retool, they know they're going to open in 3 weeks. And then now labor disputes falling under this, the employers, we don't want them to lose their employees and then once they get ready to go back into production, because part of UI was them having to look for jobs, they get pulled away. We want to try to maintain in areas where that work stoppage is short term. We want, once it's resolved, and we're very hopeful that everything gets resolved to the satisfaction of everybody involved, and then be able to get everybody back to work, get the businesses back to their production. So that's kind of one of the things to mention about that. It is one of the first states in the country that have adopted this, so we'll see what that impact is. New Jersey is the other major state that has a substantial. There are a couple others that have little portions of it. There's a lot of conversation about how this is going to impact the dynamics of a labor dispute. One of those being the potential that workers having access to benefits will have less pressure on them, which will make them more likely or go to strike more often and stay on strike more often. There is also a possibility or an approach that thinks that, okay, well, if employers are aware that if a strike begins, there is less pressure for it to end. And so if a strike begins, it may go longer than it would have, then potentially it will lead to fewer strikes. My personal thought is it's probably somewhere in the middle. I think there will be some situations where both might be true. But one of the nice things about the bill is it kind of gives us some breadth as a department to do a little more research into it. And I've said this a few times, it's probably the first time I've ever been excited about a legislative report. But so the opportunity to go in and dive into a more holistic and widespread impact of labor disputes on the economy, not just looking at the employers and employees that are involved in the labor dispute, but think about the coffee shop, that has to lay folks off because their major customer base is on strike. So we get to do some of that work and provide information that both Washington going forward and the nation as a whole can use to try to make good policy. So then I mentioned again the wage replacement for undocumented workers. We have been working pretty closely with stakeholders on both sides of the issue, the legislature. We've had a couple of different work groups funded over the past few years. One looking at kind of some of how can the policy work? Most recently, how can it be paid for? And each year the bill gets a little bit better. I felt, folks on both sides are ironing out some of the kinks. So we expect that to continue to come back next year and continue to work on it. If anybody has any questions about what we're looking at with it, please don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to connect, because it's an intricate program that has a lot of different impacts between the federal state partnership of the UI system. And so always happy to talk more about it. And like I mentioned with the first one, we are always happy to hear other voices, because y'all don't want me being the only voice in the room, because I don't know what I'm doing with a lot of this stuff. I'm just a ledge nerd. So if any of these, pique your interest, you have any questions, want to provide any input, please don't hesitate to reach out. But I'll pause there for any questions or any other things that came up in the session that you might have questions about.
Josh, you mentioned that the last, was it 2 fiscal years or 2 biennia, you had funded structured stakeholder groups on UI for undocumented. Are you just doing that on your own now? Is there a formal process for further refinements ahead of the next session?
Yeah, so there was a proposal to continue resourcing that work group. So the first one was looking at the policy overall. Then in another round, we got funding to look at the funding structure or possible funding structure. One of the requests from some members this year was to continue that in resource to look at the role that a third-party administrator could play in this program. It was not included in the budget. So because of that, our larger budget overview and some of our direction from the governor, we as an agency won't be as directly involved in it. We will absolutely be, play that support role when folks have questions, providing, being able to try and dig up answers and provide. We won't be directly involved this interim as in a formal organized work group. And then once we get closer to the next session kicking off, which is already closer than I care to think about, we'll start re-engaging with it. So it'll kind of move back into that. So we'll still be there. It's not going to be an organized effort at the moment, because especially with one of the directives from both Governor Inslee's office on his way out and then Governor Ferguson is to make sure that we are only doing things that we're resourced to do. And unfortunately, that kind of ties our hands a little bit, but we're absolutely still a partner. So, when folks have questions about how something works, we'll be there, but there won't be anything like an organized, standing meetings or anything like that.
I was going to ask that question. Regarding the unemployment benefits for striking workers, first, I assume that the striking workers don't have to be represented by a union, or do they?
No. So the way structurally the law works is there was a spot in RCW that said that if somebody involved in the labor dispute was authorized, it just removes that. So no, it doesn't require union membership. It's just if they are involved, and because prior to this law, and currently now before this goes into effect, someone who is involved in the labor or impacted by the labor dispute at that employer, but not necessarily involved in the work unit, may or may not fall under that umbrella. So no, it doesn't require union membership.
2 or more employees who are exercising their rights and engage in a work stoppage, they'll be eligible for benefits.
They may be eligible, and that's the big thing is what the biggest thing that we kind of encourage people to look at that is it does not automatically disqualify them, but on a case by case basis, they still have to hit all the other markers that other claimants does. This just removes the automatic disqualification.
Secondly, you mentioned that ESD will be monitoring negotiations and encouraging resolution of labor disputes. Does ESD consider itself to be a stakeholder?
Well, I guess Kevin should probably answer that better than me.
Well, are you going to be trying to attend all negotiations?
No, that's kind of outside of our scope. And some of the things that when we were talking to the members and staff, kind of making that clear that one of the things that is included in that is the law has to be, if it's deemed illegal, then it can. We were very upfront that we are not the people that need to be deciding that. Now there are some things that we will be involved, making sure that both employers and employees are aware of resources that we have to support, like our rapid response program, just like with other areas. But no, ESD does not intend to have a direct role other than what we do for any other employee or any other business, when they need our services.
Okay. Third question, regarding the wage replacement. Is there a situation in which an agricultural worker would be detained by ICE and be held for a time and not deported, and obviously not able to work because they're being detained, and be eligible for unemployment insurance benefits?
So, broadly speaking, on a case by case basis, employees, so to take it away from, say, an ICE detainment, and look at any other employee who is unemployed and for whatever reason has a lack of liberty. Those are typically not considered able and available. We are still in the process, or we've just begun the process of implementation. So some of the policy questions we'll have to look at of how that would interact. Under our current interpretation of rules, they would like someone who is detained by law enforcement, no matter the agency, would not likely be eligible. But as with everything, it's case by case, and there's a bunch of other things involved.
Availability issue primarily.
That's the biggest one, is being able and available for work.
Yeah, as a general matter, separating aside the ICE detention example, you might, if you end up in prison for a couple days for some incident, but you're able and available for part of the week, you might be eligible for benefits. If you're not, if you go through, because again, unemployment insurance is week by week. If in any given week you're detained for a period of time that makes it such that you're not available for enough hours, you wouldn't meet that requirement. And just to be clear on your previous question, Mike, our role in unemployment benefits, including for striking workers, is to adjudicate individual claims. So our involvement is to do fact finding with both the claimant and the employer to determine, to see what happened and then determine if they're eligible. We have the report that Josh is very excited about. And that is really about, correct me if I'm wrong here, Josh, like impacts, in other words, like just sort of the straightforward impacts in terms of how many strikes do we pay benefits for, what were the total workers, how much benefits will we paid out, and an attempt to do an analysis around indirect impacts, which is not something that's easy to do. There's a strike at this site, how did that affect this supplier, or so on and so forth.
Well, you never know how a state agency is going to philosophically approach an issue, so it's asking. And thinking about these detentions, really through no fault of their own, some people are or could be detained and taken away from work for weeks, and they're legal to work, and they're missing income. And I'm just thinking about it. Hadn't really thought of that situation before, but you know, if you had an employee who was someone who wanted to have working and they were in that situation, it's a tough situation for them.
Sure.
Losing income.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the things broadly we're doing as an agency, starting this interim, and it's going to be kind of a long-term project, is looking generally at some of the regulatory structures that we have. I mean, unemployment insurance has both a blessing and a curse in the fact that it's a 95-year-old program. So there's a lot of stability there that you don't see if you're looking at, say, our paid family medical leave program, which is very new. The other side of that coin is our paid family medical leave program is more nimble in a lot of areas that UI is not quite there. So one of the plans that we're holistically doing as an agency is going to be looking at to make sure that the RCW, the WAC, and our internal policies that are in place are still relevant to our modern workforce. And we're just in the discovery, because there's a, you know, as we go through, we want to make sure that we are serving the people of the state of Washington and within the bounds of our federal and state guidelines. So it's a great question. It's something that we're going to need to get more information on, because it's changing. You know, that those situations are becoming a little bit different than they might have been in the past, and we recognize that. But we're very dedicated to making it very intentional work, because we don't want to cause more harm by knee-jerk reactions. So, but we definitely have it on our radar.
It's a really good point, because more than ever, we're having people who have work authorization, you know, who are being detained, as opposed to, I think at some point it was more likely that someone had no work authorization if they were in that situation, but we're seeing more, we'll probably continue to see more of that. So it's a really good point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Something we should take with us.
Yeah, because there are some caveats, like, and that's the reason we kind of give the lawyerly, it depends, answer a lot, because we do have some leeway with, you know, some of our equity and good conscience decisions to look at some of that stuff. But again, like I mentioned, we want to do it holistically. First off, we don't want to put ourselves in jeopardy of losing federal funding because we, you know, get on the wrong side of that. But we also, you know, we wanted to determine when, you know, when it's a matter of the state, you know, our outlook and the way that we want to run our state. Sometimes that's worth a fight. But again, going back to that, we want to make sure it's intentional. And we have a lot of input from a lot of stakeholders.
another question, if you don't mind. In talking with other agencies, I know some of them are already starting on drafting decision packages already. As you said, it's next session will be on as soon as everyone feels is reasonable. On what timeline will you be able to give us any updates on what ESD may be working on for the next session? I know we had a proposed decision package on reclassifying some of the ASWS staff that I think was set aside because of budget constraints. Are we going to be revisiting some of those past ones? Are there new proposals that we should be prepared for because of our meeting tempo having changed to more quarterly rather than monthly there? I'm just wondering what timeline we'll get for those updates.
Yeah, so right now we just kind of have some very broad timelines in mind, and we're in the process of ironing them out. Generally speaking, what we're expecting is the decision packages to be due to the governor's office mid-September. What we like to try to do is start getting kind of the list of what we would like to do early June in the department, early June, throughout June, start willing them down into what's going forward. It's a little more uncertainty this year as we're going through. This will be our first turn through this cycle with the new administration. So that caveat of what I'm saying could absolutely change. We are very aware of the overall budget situation, plus going into a supplemental budget rather than an operating budget where we have some tight parameters on what we are going to be allowed to ask for. And then just also as an agency, making sure that we are going through. Kaylee mentioned briefly that, our flexible funding, our state funding is a little stressed with the setup of the operating budget. So I would expect a lot of our efforts to be focused on that and making sure that we have program sustainability. But through the summer is don't know the exact time, but to start getting out to all of our advisory, our UI unemployment insurance advisory committee, paid leave, the Watt Cares Trust that we participate in this committee, start getting out that information as early as we can, because one of the things that we are absolutely dedicated to is getting as much stakeholder feedback so that, I would rather have that work happen from now to September than me working on it at 9:30 on a Tuesday night during session. So as soon as we start getting things that we're able to get out and start getting feedback on, we're absolutely dedicated to getting that information out.
You're still going to be working at 9:30.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to save it for the stuff that I don't know is going to come.
Yeah, there's a code for it. Just
All right, any more questions for Josh before we go to that topic, John, of budget? I should say we focused on ESD bills. If any other agency has any comment about budget session, they're free to make it or not. But we just wanted to make sure you heard from us. Go ahead.
Dan, I heard John ask for status regarding the ag decision package.
Yeah, we'll get into that in here. Okay. All right, well, let's do that. Next slide, Vicky. All right, so again, what I wanted to do here, because I think it's helpful for this group, is make sure that everybody has a good understanding of the bigger picture for our agency, particularly when it comes to the federal funding that we receive, both the revenue coming in and our expenditures and the pressure on those accounts, and as well as an understanding of what our state accounts are. Again, I know we'll talk about those accounts and a couple of our fund sources here, but just want to make sure you've had the big picture in terms of what's occurring with our agency. Josh went through relevant bills. I'll talk about relevant decision packages that we're funding, included the ASWS one. And then at the end, what we really want to make sure you all understand is, as has been mentioned before, what the pressure is like on our state accounts. So I'm going to start just by walking through what are, generally speaking, our major federal funding sources. So we get, the biggest grant we get is our unemployment insurance administrative grant. All states get this grant. The way it works is a component, as our employers in the room know, a component of the UI tax that employers pay. As you can see on there, $7,000 tax on for $7,000 of each worker's earnings. That goes to the feds. And then that is, Congress passes an appropriations bill and funding is distributed out to states based on the resources that states say that they need, and then funding can shift. When the economy gets worse, we get more UI admin. When it gets better, we get less. Go ahead, Mike.
Is that set in statute, the amount that of the allocation to each state? Is there any potential for the Trump administration to retaliate against Washington State for sanctuary policies or some other perceived non-cooperation and try and slash that?
I would say that it should. The exact allocation is not. Each state puts together what's called a resource justification manual, and that state says in the past year we had this level of claims load and we needed to spend X amount on staff processing claims, X amount on the tax functions, X amount on IT, the different functions. Generally speaking, over the many years, states have not been receiving the amount that they've asked for because the overall pie is not big enough from Congress. We have gotten typically 70% of what we have needed out of the UI admin grant. And that money is meant to be distributed by the Department of Labor in a manner that reflects the top line appropriation and the resources that states have asked for. And then in each congressional appropriation is basically if a certain level of increased claims happens during that fiscal year, states get more quote unquote above base funding. So to answer your question, Mike, to be honest, maybe they could do that. It's kind of like anything else. You would think it would take an act of Congress to do that.
Dan, if I could ask a follow-up question there. Some Wagner, Pizer, and others are more formula-based. Every year we get a foreign labor certification grant agreement that stipulates how those dollars are used. That might be more subject to restrictions on those funds specifically for ASWS.
Yeah, so let's go into these. So the next major grant that we get is the Wagner Pizer grant, which we've talked about here. That one, Congress appropriates X amount of dollars, and then there is a, me here, Alberto, I think it's Department of Labor's internal kind of based on unemployment and other factors, distribution to states. I think you've talked about it here. We all know that we put 90% of that to our general employment services and 10% specifically to migrant seasonal farm workers. And then we have our WIOA funds. These are primarily formula grants that we distribute out to local workforce areas. And we just got, we typically in May get an announcement that says this is the funding amount for states for both those WIOA funds and Wagner Pizer funds for the year starting July 1st. We just got those, so I can't, maybe Alberto, if you want to comment, I think they're relatively stable and all is normal, but go ahead.
Not surprisingly, Wagner Pizer is roughly flat. It's been flat for over 20 years. And so from a funding perspective, that remained relatively the same. There were some differences in the funding sources that pass through to our local workforce boards. There's 3 primary programs that we fund, adult, dislocated worker, and youth. There were fluctuations in those funding sources with what I would categorize as a significant increase in dislocated worker funds, but significant reductions in youth and adult. And so I think relatively when you look at those fund sources, they balance out. So I guess all in summary to say status quo.
And so then, and John, to your question, and thank you, Alberto, then we have a series of other just sort of individual grants. Trade Adjustment Assistance is a program that's being phased out. Our RESEA program is a program aimed at unemployed workers to get them reemployed, specific program for veterans, and then the Foreign Labor Certification Grant that we're all familiar with here. And to answer your question, John, at the end of the day, unless there's specific language in the appropriations bill, there's a line that just says grants to states, and then we get our, TEGL, I think that we get notice from the Department of Labor. Here's the parameters for this grant, and here's how much you get. we have. Alberta, this is probably a history you know better than I, but I know there was a period of time when we were engaging with the Department of Labor around how they are calculating their allocation to states, because we saw that Washington was one of the top states for H-2A applications, yet it didn't seem like we were getting our proportional share of the funding. That's Department of Labor. To your question, the other parameters of the grant, and Bertha, maybe you can chime in here if you have anything to add. You know, there are pieces of it. You can spend up to 20% on the agriculture wage survey. I think up to 20% maybe on housing. I don't know if you have anything to add here, Bertha, but to directly answer your question, John, there's nothing that I can think of that would really stop the Department of Labor from making unilateral decisions in terms of either the amount of funding or some of the nature of the grant. I think in statute it's just.
And that follows you usually get the TGO right around the beginning of the federal fiscal year, so this fall.
No, I think
when does it
usually
come
it's
out?
in May, but to my knowledge, I haven't seen it
Okay.
come through yet.
FLC.
And that's right. And the calculation by DOL also includes H-2B, even though this committee is charged with H-2A. We do receive an allocation to do the H-2B job order management. And we, in our state, we don't have the volume of H-2B. So I think that that's likely what brings down, the proportion. But we are, I think as of the last quarter, we are still fourth in terms of H-2A positions certified, and we have 9.6% of the national share.
That means, do we have the numbers on H-2B?
We do, but they're not numbers that we report to this committee. We have them, we just don't have them at hand at this moment.
We have 79 applications, H-2B.
We've seen more and more activity in terms from L&I issues being confronted by workers with H-2B.
Yeah, and ASWS doesn't do any compliance work around H-2B. And as a matter of fact, before our federal grant monitoring in 2022-23, we created job orders, but one of the monitoring findings was to not do that and basically help employers transition to a self-serve system. And that's been very successful.
So, Bertha, Uriah said that there's an increased activity in H-2B complaints. Is it because, and I can't remember, is it because employers can file their H-2B contract in another state and have the workers go into the neighboring state too?
Well, I believe you're probably referring to health and safety issues.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Safety,
Yeah.
I know you're the expert on that.
So does H-2B also cover housing? Their housing?
No. Very tricky. They're not required to provide free housing, but they generally do provide housing and they charge for it.
Right.
And there have been issues.
So there have been issues
Conditions
of
of the housing,
H-2B.
right?
Really, really serious conditions.
Yes, yeah, you guys referred one to us and that was pretty serious.
I mean, it really is interesting that H-2B workers suffer a lot of the same issues as H-2A workers. The forestry in particular, there's been particular issues around H-2B forestry workers.
That would be temporary worker housing, wouldn't it, that they would be in, supposedly, if somebody knew about it?
Yes.
I mean,
it is, because if you can show that the employer's providing.
Exactly, that's the key.
But they are sometimes, there's these very mixed. So it's a very blended, so because they want them housed, right? I mean, if you just bring in workers and tell them, go find housing. That's my responsibility. Super successful. So they tend to rent apartments or do other things and then, okay.
But that's the tricky part that we have run into is you have a contractor who brings the H-2Bs who happens to, however they do it, either they own some shack somewhere or they're leasing a set of apartments and then they sublease to the H2B. And so at the same time, so, well, who's providing the housing? Well, we're not providing it. John is actually renting.
Yeah.
So that's where we run into in terms
There's
of.
some guidance in the federal migrant seasonal farm worker, about that, and there's some case law about, but anyway, I don't know if it would by analogy apply. There is some, anyway, I'd be happy to talk more about that.
So anyway, I thought I raised it because
Yes. No, and it does seem tricky that we don't, it did seem like this issue that kind of fell through some cracks at the state level. The US Department of Labor does enforce H2B forestry, and I know in the past have done some work, but it does feel like a problem that there's this gap at the state level where everyone's like, well, I don't know that they come under ours, and I don't know, it's kind of.
So Edgar has this.
Yeah. Let's go to Edgar.
Yeah, this winter we had way more complaints from H2B workers than ever before. So I thought that was a pretty, interesting thing. And yeah, the issues were around housing and retaliation and wages. We on one of the cases we did reach out, and Ellen and I did an awesome job on following through this forestry thing in where was it, Chehalis, I think. But yeah, and we reached out to Michelle and other folks, but it was just really really interesting to hear that there wasn't really much that could be done to help H2B workers, especially around housing and some of the other issues. But I think for what it's worth, I would think it'd be good for this committee to start maybe looking into the H2B because yeah, it was very confusing for me to just try to help a worker that we would help with H2A, but then the H2B had a whole different set of guidelines that I wasn't familiar with. But I think it'd be worth looking into that with this committee.
Let me go first, man.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if Juan Gomez could comment on whether Department of Health is monitoring H2B applications, and with regard to housing, as it wouldn't be in the same way as with H2A since housing is required and has to meet certain standards, but that would be temporary worker housing, and wondered what they do.
I would like to see the numbers. I think it would be interesting to see if the numbers are growing. These H2B numbers, I'd be interested to see how that track it, to see how that's going.
Did you want to hear from?
Yeah, is Juan still on the line?
Yeah, Juan is there. Juan, can you speak to the H2B?
Yeah, I'm still here, Mike. So we actually went to this facility as well that Edgar mentioned. So it wasn't just an LNI venture. We did this work together with ESD and LNI, and one of our inspectors went to the facility as well to inspect. And I'm asking Jerry Carey, that has more firsthand experience with this particular facility, to provide more information. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, we went to do a complaint investigation. It was a co-visit with LNI inspector. I can't think of the exact date, but it was the first week of March, I believe around March 4th. And there was a lot of questions being asked about the H2B, H2A, H2B, because in our regulations, H2A, H2B is not defined in our regulations, but what is defined is what a agricultural employee is. And after some discussion with ESD and LNI and looking at it through our WAC, it was defined basically the H2B can be defined as a agricultural employee. So we did conduct the investigation with LNI, and LNI had the same had this similar outlook on what a H-2B is as far as agricultural employee. But we don't know of the facilities that we have that are H-2B. We have an idea of how many are H-2A, because we do ask that information on our application, but we do not ask for if you're H-2B or not.
I thought the
just
temporary worker housing regulations applied to temporary housing supplied by an employer, no matter whether they're agriculture or not. Am I wrong on that?
It's agricultural employee. It has to be agricultural employee.
Yes.
And also just to point out too, that many H-2B positions probably do fit within the definition of agricultural, like forestry, et cetera, but H-2B also includes carnival workers and landscapers and hospitality, and so those fishing, those would likely not be within the definition.
And if I can also add to the question that Mike was asked at the beginning, when it comes to regulations, we are looking at this. We are evaluating the temporary worker housing rule and looking and doing our first. I was going to touch on this later when we had the floor, but we have a new policy team, and we're looking at all the different regulations that are in our wheelhouse here in our Office of Environmental Health and Safety, which includes temporary worker housing. So we're just doing our first look at what are some of the areas we'd like to change, from definitions to new incoming areas such as recreational vehicles. So we're looking at everything. So don't have a specific answer how this is going to roll out, but this is our first year since Jerry and I have been part of this program, which has been almost 4 years, that we're getting H-2B complaints. So we're looking at everything right now.
Is it possible to track the ag H-2B workers?
Well, it was interesting, Rosalind, that we would know how many, because H-2B clearance orders would go through the state, I believe. So you know how many clearance orders there are. But because they aren't required legally to provide housing, they don't have to list where the workers are housed in their application, which is one reason that they can be difficult to find. And it's really interesting that they're finding FJ now and or FUJ, because there have always been a lot of issues around health and safety with H-2B, but it's hard. Like, we've tried to do outreach to H-2B workers, and it's been a real challenge because their housing is not listed. They don't have to put where the workers are.
Yes.
We found them through community organizations in Chehalis at times, like some of the Mexican stores, or but they're kind of dispersed. So that's
what we can track numbers.
Correct.
Increasing, trying to track if it's growing. I'm just curious whether we can track just the ag workers, the ones that qualify as ag employees.
I'm thinking this may be a topic that we want to take to our next meeting with a little bit more information too. We can look into how we track and how we find.
To Michelle's point too, U.S. Department of Labor, their wage and hour division does have enforcement authority, jurisdiction over H-2A issues. Their enforcement in the last couple of years has focused on traffic safety. 2 years ago, there was a multiple fatality collision of H-2B forestry workers near Castle Rock. And also I think one or two before that. So in that case, I know that there was like a 2-hour commute at least between housing and very early in the morning. And so that adds to the point of, disbursement and all of those things.
Could I make a suggestion that maybe we have like a separate, I mean, I would love to touch base with both DOH and LNI about how they're just try to clarify what jurisdiction different agencies have over I don't know, I'm just trying to think maybe to gather a little more before we as a committee look at it, if we could figure out a little bit more who might have legal enforcement jurisdiction. I mean, I think it is a group that deserves our attention, but I'm trying to think, maybe we need to do a little.
I think so. I think so. Let us take it back, the state agency partners on the committee. We'll do a little bit of discovery on this and bring it back to you all. How's that?
Could you bring numbers?
We will do our best to bring numbers. Thank you.
All right. Speaking of numbers, Rosalinda, back to the budget. Okay, so we talked about, again, ESD operates unemployment programs, employment programs, and we also have labor market information programs. So we have two key grants in this space, one being from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you can think about their work products as when you see just various employment reports, projections, so on and so forth, is funded by that grant. And then workforce information grants are primarily, it's a small grant, but it's primarily funding our economists. We have a chief labor economist and an economist in different areas throughout the state. So again, it's a combination of federal grants. If they make up roughly 60% of the funding our agency gets, and then cross unemployment, employment, and labor market information programs. Next slide, please, Vicki. And then, so I think you're familiar with these two accounts. So these are the two state accounts that we have that that are used both to supplement shortfalls in federal funding, and the legislature uses them to fund specific activities. So as you all know, the ASWS office is funded by this claimant placement program or CPP account. When the legislature passes various provisos or even bills, there's not a large cost for us to administer, the bills that Josh spoke to, but those are funded by CPP and various other initiatives, or CPP and P&I. So again, as I think you all know, so the CPP is a surcharge that employers see on their UI tax bill. So you have a UI tax bill that has costs or taxes that are paid directly into the trust fund to pay benefits. That makes up, the vast majority of that tax, but there is a piece of that goes into this account that we use for those purposes. And then penalties and interest. This is, when there are compliance issues with employers, whether they're reporting and paying taxes late or inaccurately or not at all, or interest that UI recipients pay when they are delinquent in paying back overpayment. So those two accounts are, again, used to supplement, which I'll get to in a minute, real shortfalls in federal funding, and then to fund specific initiatives like the ASWS office.
Dan, can I ask a clarifying question? Claimant placement program, is that a fixed dollar amount? Is it a percentage?
It's a percentage. So all employers pay 0.02% of their tax. If you're looking at an employer tax bill, I think Mike and I might have talked about this. It shows on there as EAP, Employment Assistance Program, and it'll show as a 0.02 or 0.03 depending on employers. And then that goes into an account, and for us to use that requires legislative authorization to use it for specific purposes. Same with P&I.
Yeah, and so most employers actually pay 0.03%. Rate class 20 and rate class 40 employees only pay 0.02. They get a 0.01% discount. So it makes it a little weird to balance the numbers.
And new employers, I think, start to for like a quarter or two. All right. Next slide, please. All right. So this slide is meant to show what our situation is in terms of in real terms. So when adjusted for inflation, the decline in federal revenue we're getting as an agency. So what you can see here is looking back 10 years. If you just look at 2024, 2014, you can see we're lower. Of course, you see a increase during the pandemic. So that blue bar is our UI administration grant. That's our biggest pot of money. And of course, as the title suggests, is used to administer our UI program. That orange bar is the Wagner-Peiser grant that we've talked about in this committee that you speak to in the reports to the legislature. 90% of which goes to general employment services, 10% of which goes to MSFW related work. The lighter blue is the UI RESEA program. That's become sort of a bigger, more important program and funding source that we have, and specifically to get unemployment insurance claimants reemployed. That green bar, which you can see has been big in the past, that's trade adjustment assistance, a program that provides benefits and job training opportunities to workers displaced by trade. That program has not been reauthorized by Congress, so you see a sunsetting. You essentially see almost no green there at the end. And then other USDO grants are, the labor market information ones I've mentioned, and other grants that we get from time to time that are more discretionary. But the big takeaway here to remember is, again, previous slide, we're using state money, CPP and P&I, to supplement, in part to supplement federal shortfalls. And here you can see that shortfall getting worse. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see cost increases. So you can see our central service and compensation cost increases. What that basically means is in the light blue bar, things like IT infrastructure just cost more today than they did, in previous years. And then the blue bar is, anytime you see that state government workers getting an increase, which we all support, that is a cost that is not made up for by a federal grant. That is something that the state accounts pay for.
Yeah, and the model for determining technology grants was set in the early 1990s. So if you can imagine, technology looks a little bit different now than then. But a lot of the resource justification model that Dan mentioned earlier has been updated since the early 90s, which kind of that combined with the adjusted for inflation just kind of exacerbates the problem.
Could you clarify the numbers across the bottom? It looks like there's a biennial number followed by a single fiscal year number, and so I'm a little confused.
Yeah, you know what that probably is, to be honest, John. It's like pulling from actually, I don't know. Do you know, John?
I'm guessing that is budget. So 2017-19 would be the cost that was allocated in the biennial budget. The 2018 would have been the supplemental.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
and
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because 21 we did have a second supplemental.
Right.
Basically, go by the first number in the biennial year, and that sort of shows the year over year.
So on the 25-24, I mean, is that just like you were saying, salary increases, or does it include new FTEs?
Well, it's a large part of it is cost of living adjustments. Some of it, and we'll get in this a little bit details, there's been some job reclassifications that raise labor costs. We can get more information on how that breakdown is, but a lot of it's the COLAs. As you start seeing, it just costs more to do business than it used to.
Yeah, COLAs, healthcare costs,
benefits,
reclassifications, and also to clarify, this is an agency-wide, not just for the H2A team, the ASWS team.
Yeah, I mean, I will say as a general matter, we don't have a slide here with FTE counts. I'll talk a little bit about our base budget when on the coming slides, we're talking about what the outcome was of this legislative session. But by and large, from an FTE standpoint, as a general matter, our sort of, as I'll get to, rebasing for this year is putting us kind of back to where we were prior to the pandemic. And maybe Disher Alberto can speak better to in the employment service space in particular. Your sort of head count, maybe pre-pandemic to today, if you want to.
I think that the previous slide mentioned Trade Adjustment Act sunset. That really impacts our staffing in the workforce centers because we operate that grant. It used to be one of the largest fund source that we had to provide services to Washingtonians. And as Dan mentioned, Wagner Pfizer, which is our core fund, has been flat for the past 20 years. So every single quota adjustment, any increase in facilities, all that is something that we have to absorb. That means decrease FTE. So in general, in the workforce side, we are well below what we were at before the pandemic. So we do have reduced services across the board.
All right, next slide, please, Vicki. All right, so this next couple of slides, we'll just get into what the outcome of the budget was. So we have, that picture that we painted around the federal funding sources and that Ish just spoke to. A lot of our one-time pandemic funding is coming to an end, whether that's federal in the form of CARES Act, the Pandemic Response Bill, or American Rescue Plan Act funding is coming to an end. We had state funding to fill like a precipitous drop in federal funding from the UI Admin grant coming out of the pandemic and for specific work related to UI. So those funding sources are coming to an end because you all know just across the government enterprise, there's a reduction in management and administrative positions. So we have that in our budget too. And then ultimately, again, you have this, federal revenue is declining, as I just spoke to on the employment side, and the availability of CPP and P&I to cover shortfalls has increasingly become less of an option. So that is sort of with all of that, we ultimately have a base level of funding that the legislature passed that, as Cammie spoke to, we froze hiring and sought to achieve other savings, particularly on our unemployment administration CPP and P&I accounts. Starting last summer, there was an enterprise-wide freeze on hiring, and so we ultimately started the process of getting to our reduced base earlier. What that has meant for our agency writ large is a reduction of roughly 100 positions, most of which were vacant. And so we froze those positions and we haven't been hiring, and now we've just abolished them because we don't have the money for them. But we have had a reduction, and that spans across the agency, whether you're in unemployment insurance, employment services, labor market, or any of the central support services, just a sort of reduction in our base funding. And then in the next slides, I'll get to money put back in through decision packages and including for the ASWS office. So next slide, please. All right, so then a number of things were funded, and it's important to know, again, for this conversation, that when things are funded, they're funded out of these two state accounts. So that first one, the federal funding shortfall, is just, that kind of relates back to our base, but that is some money from our CPP account that helps to make up for the drop in federal funding. You got money for a UI customer improvement work, 11.2 million over the biennium, and that work is includes call center staff, so people able to pick up phones in the UI call center. So overall, as we're coming out of our budget, we are not reducing frontline staff serving customers in UI, and that puts us, roughly again where we were pre-pandemic. That also helps fund the continuation of folks we have in the work source center who help with unemployment insurance claims. And that's important both for unemployment insurance and because it keeps those folks in staff to do what they primarily do, which is employment services. We have 1 year of funding to maintain some non-perm staff who do UI fraud work, and we have to provide a long-term strategy for that work. And again, I'm going through these not necessarily because all of them impact this committee's work, but to give you a sense of these costs on our CPP and P&I accounts. $1 million. We had a federal grant to fund community-based organizations out in community throughout the state, serving different marginalized communities, helping them better access, better navigate the UI system. We've got some money to continue, state money to continue that for a year. I think in this committee, we've talked about our workforce information technology system as a case management system for people serving customers in the WorkSource Center. That continues to be funded. We're aiming to launch that in the next year or so, and then maintenance and operation of that work from there. We updated our website with federal funds or modernized it, a little bit of money to help with that. We're continuing. And then ASWS, I'll get to the details of that on a future slide, but we did get a portion of what you all had recommended and we were seeking in the agriculture space. Now, these last three things are important to know because of the pressure that they further place on our two state accounts again. So we have a program that we administer that's implemented out in local workforce areas called Economic Security for All. The program aims to bring people experiencing or near the poverty level up to economic self-sufficiency. It was funded with general fund state. It's now being funded by CPP, at least for this biennium. Career Connect Washington is a program that helps youth find job opportunities through apprenticeship and otherwise. Previously funded by an education account, now funded by P&I, again for this biennium. Work First program, which, and Alberto can describe better than I can, but helping TANF, I think.
Job search.
TANF folks with their job search. Again, a swap there. So there's some further costs to these two accounts. Next slide, please, Vicki.
Dan,
yeah.
Going back to the previous slide.
Yep.
Those programs at the bottom, Economic Security for All and Career Connect Washington, are those programs administered by WBC councils or is that WorkSource?
Yeah, so the first one is Economic Security for All, is money that we are distributing out to local workforce areas. You know, services are provided in WorkSource, but it is the WDCs. Career Connect Washington, there might be some WDC involvement, but it is direct contracting to various providers of that, like apprenticeship and other type of job training, job preparation.
I mean, just for selfish reasons, I guess, how much does Employment Security have as far as directing some of those other entities to do work around the ag industry? To one of the issues that we
are going to talk about that.
Yeah, one of the things that we challenge with in the ag industry is getting more people to be involved in careers in ag. And so just wondering whether I should be telling them to do something or telling you to do something.
Let's talk about that. One of the things in my my vision, because we literally had no other title for a little bit, was the idea of bringing more voices into the conversation in this committee. The two that I would like to see brought in would be a voice from the local workforce development boards so that they're part of this discussion, and also Maria's voice with the Council on Hispanic Affairs. I think is an important voice to bring to our committee. So just preview that, but I do want to talk about it.
Joy, can I also add something?
Yes.
Alberto and I are happy to meet and talk more about that with you as well. 55% of all WorkSource staff are ESD staff. More than half of the programs are actually operated by us. And if there's things we can do better or differently to support the ag industry, we'd like to hear it from you. So we can see how we can implement those.
All right, so a couple more slides here and then we'll be done with this presentation. So ASWS, you all recall that you all came together to work on a decision package that initially included money to reclassify compliance staff in ASWS office, money for a coordinator for central point of coordination for domestic farm worker recruitment, referral, and placement. Some staff, I think, too, in the WorkSource centers to further help with that domestic recruitment and placement. The governor's budget, Governor Inslee's budget, did not include that additional staff in the WorkSource center, but they did include this, and this was ultimately funded in the budget. So this means for the ASWS office, there's the There's the CPP funded amount that office gets for the biennium, the 3.83 million. And then there's a roughly $600,000 increase for that reclassification and for that hiring of the person in the workforce center. So in a very difficult budget environment, some money was added, as you can see here, for the work that you and we all care about.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just scratching my head. Go ahead.
I was gonna just ask, if anyone could explain just a little bit more about what that looks like. I mean, the central point, is that a person? Where, yeah.
And then
Yeah.
also maybe to confirm that that would be a workforce services employee, not an ASWS employee.
Right.
Yeah, that's correct. I think our intent is to recruit for a position. So it is a person, and really to strengthen just how we promote job orders, standardize that language a little bit better across all our centers in the state. And also to kind of just provide some reinforcement for our local offices. Obviously, we run multiple programs, and just having that focal, that central point of contact, I think will improve the way we run our recruitment.
Because currently under the status quo, this is an additional duty for a staff working on other programs. Depending on which office, it might be somebody that does employment services or business services or teach a class. And then when we have a clearance order, then they shift gear and they start working on it. So having this person will allow us to be more structured.
So that's the way it was done in terms of, I'm sorry, so in other words, before it was just part of.
It's a piece of people.
Right,
working by the
and this way we'll have one person really.
That person will not supplant the existing team members, but that person creates structure and make it more effective.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to close here with a grand finale, and one of the key reasons for this entire higher level and then digging down presentation. So next slide, please, Vicki. All right, so what you see here is when you take all of that, that is the picture that we have for our state accounts, CPP and P&I. Again, these are accounts that supplement that federal funding shortfall and that fund specific initiatives, including all of the ones that I mentioned a couple slides earlier, and including the ASWS office. And as you can see by this slide, the blue line being CPP, the orange line being P&I, that things get dicey in the next biennium under our current projections, under our current spending as authorized in the most recent budget, including our reduction in our base funding. And these are the accounts that we have to do our work. So whether it is just direct funding for the ASWS office or anything sort of tangentially related when you ask about decision packages or even agency request legislation for which there's a cost that you might be interested in, those are the accounts that we traditionally rely on. When we're talking about an FLC grant, is it going to be less for Washington? Is it going to be different for Washington? If it is, those are the accounts that we rely on to supplement that, and we have what we have for the ASWS office. Ish and Alberto talking about how they've had to reduce staff in employment service centers because the Wagner-Pfizer grant has been falling in real terms. That matters for all employment and services. That matters when you do the math, as you all have in your reports to the legislature around migrant seasonal farm workers. Topic to dive into more later. And so all this is situational awareness. This is what these accounts look like in these current, with the current budget.
Dan, I noticed the orange line for penalties goes under the 0 mark. So do you budget for what is there now and leave no projections for future penalties, assuming everyone is angelic or it's unreliable? Or can we expect that there will be penalties at some point during the biennium and that will balance?
We don't put it at 0. Sounds like Josh wants to chime in, so I'll let him do that, but they are very hard. CPP is easier to project.
Yeah.
We have, this many employers, here's the tax. P&I is a lot trickier, but I heard
Yeah,
you
and
jump in.
so one thing that this is showing is not necessarily the income, it's showing the account balance at the end of the year. So we do try to project how much P&I we will have each year, but under our current calculations, by 27, we are anticipating spending more than we bring in. That in the CPP looks currently is out to fiscal year 29. Another thing to remember here is our actuary office does a fantastic job of bringing in a whole bunch of factors. However, economic factors impact us greatly. So in the case of, economic downturn, potential recession, this could easily become a little more dire. If in a improved economic outcast, it could be a little rosier. But yeah, so what they're trying to show here is at the end of the year, this is what the balance is. And so over the next few years, we're expecting to spend more than we bring in.
Is that last year on the x-axis 2029? I can't see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is 2 biennial.
So actually, that's not last year. That is, well, is that FY25? Is that?
So we start with 25 and it goes through 29.
Okay, so yes.
We're
that
about
is-
26, 27.
So it starts at basically where we stand today. Okay.
Yeah, so that's what we're projecting to have at the end of June 30th is what we're expecting to have of this year, and then June 30th of the next 4 years.
It's led to some very interesting conversations in this agency. Say that much. Thank you so much, Dan, and Josh, for all of that. Any further questions?
Not a question, but just thank you, Dan. This past chair, you probably are used to the way we interject with detailed questions.
You were
If you're not too
John.
triggered.
I woke up this morning and thought, I'm gonna be in a room with John Devaney. I gotta bring my
Between
man.
Rosalind and I, show me the data and explain the numbers.
Yeah, that's a very disappointing, finale. Thank you.
Better to know.
Yes.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind, there are multiple action points between now and then.
Right.
So like this, it's situational awareness. There are opportunities to improve. There are also potentials to make it worse, but it's definitely it's information that we're trying to make sure, especially our authorizing environment, are aware of, so that we can kind of come up with better solutions. Because ultimately, we want to be able to keep providing and improving our services, but you have to have resources.
All right. Thank you again. All right, so given that we wanted to spend that extra time on that part of the agenda, we are going to radically shorten our updates. The members have the slides sent to them, and we will send a fresh deck that is complete after this meeting. But the slides basically stand on their own as they have with every monthly update. So I would first turn to Bertha, and then I will turn to Craig for any highlights you'd like to give in a quick couple minutes.
Yes, so I guess we will pivot to some more rosier, information as Josh stated. So I want to highlight a couple things. The rest is pretty, I think, clear from the descriptions in the slide. But Vicki, if you could go to the next one, please. So this is what's included, and I'll just speak very generally. So we have a new staff member, Susana Rodriguez, who you met at the top of this meeting. She comes to us from L&I Community Relations. We actually got her from Miguel's team, and she started at the beginning of February.
That's what lunch is.
Yes, lunch. So she is physically located in the Tri-Cities and off to a fantastic start. So we're really happy to have her, and we're off to a great start. So we've been tracking the change, if any, in our federal partnerships since the inauguration of the new administration. So OFLC, actually, let's go to that slide, please, Vicki, the federal partnership. So Office of Foreign Labor Certification, it's largely been business as usual. We haven't noticed any change to our regular communication with That team is direct, it's regular, it's timely, it's responsive. I think a lot of that is a function of the relationship that we built with them over the last couple of years. The call that Petra actually just left the room to take was from the head of the West Coast team. So that's remained largely unchanged. And this office was remote from, I think, 2012. And as far as we can tell, they haven't been subject to the return to work federal orders. So they, yeah, so it's been business as usual with minimal interruption.
So they haven't replaced the team or that particular team?
No, I don't think there's actually been any change in the team. USDL Wage and Hour Division, we have a biweekly meeting with them for a time in February and March. They were directed by their leadership to suspend meeting with the state workforce agencies, but we're back on. Enforcement priorities from Wage and Hour, they used to have 5. Now they're focusing in on 2, which is agriculture and construction. They're also in a hiring freeze. They have, at the time of the administration change, they had 2 in kind of the final recruitment stages, 2 inspectors. They've had to abandon that. There's been significant retirements and separations at the regional level. I think Tom said that he's one of the few remaining regional directors. And as to right now, there's been no training for the inspectors regarding the H-2 worker protection rule, even though much of that is still good law. Employment Training Administration, if you recall, 2 years ago, we had a visit from Christopher Engdahl, who is our regional minor advocate. He worked for the federal government for 39 years. He retired at the end of April. His replacement is new, I think, to the program. There's also been a change in federal project officers, and they've confirmed that there'll be no State Minor Advocate Training Conference this year, no Region 6 training conference. So they're just kind of in a, I would say, reorganization mode, but we're continuing to keep in contact with that office. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just talks about our coordination that we've cultivated over the last 6 months with our peer states. Next slide. So H-2A litigation, there's a couple of pending cases, one regarding the prevailing wage survey, the other regarding the injunction of the H-2A protection rule, at least in part. I want to remind everybody that ESD is not a party to this litigation, and we're not making comment on this litigation. But it does impact us because these orders direct or order USDOL, who is a party, to do certain things. And so we basically have, we do what they tell us to do. And when the injunction came out, I believe in FUJ at the end of March, that USDOL directed us to basically hold off on issuing any decision, including notice of acceptance or notices of denial or deficiency, et cetera, while they basically figured out how they were going to categorize all of the already filed applications and how they were going to do that moving forward. So we did that. As of last Monday, we're back to business as usual. The second injunction was regarding prevailing wages. This injunction came out of the Western District in Washington, and it directed USDOL to ask ESD to post the prevailing wages on our website, which we did in about 2 to 3 days after we received that contact. So prevailing wages are there. Of course, they're required on the application. Our team is trained to check for that, and we're in constant communication with USDOL about how they want us to evaluate those things.
Can I ask a question
Yes, ma'am.
about that? It's actually more to Craig, I guess, or to Alberto, which is a lot of the applications will still have the offer of paying the AWR on them because they were approved before that litigation.
Right.
And I just wondered, and the way most workers who do apply for those jobs, they don't go to the website, they go to the local office. Is there any training going on or any information out at a local office or where those are posted to confirm that the real wage being offered on those is the piece rate. You know what I mean? Because if you look at the actual clearance order, it will say we're gonna pay this hourly rate.
Right.
So I just wondered how workers will know.
I'll defer to Craig on this one. He's more current than I am. I know we've been taking some actions, but I think we'd get more current information from Craig on this.
Yeah, we're communicating with the application holding offices to make sure that they're aware of this. And I want to coordinate with Bertha, but I think we are looking at updating those job orders to include something as well that were already in place prior to this.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. Discontinuation of services, which is a function of our office. We have, during this period, since the beginning of our program year, we have initiated 2. One has resulted in a final determination. The other has, it's still pending, and we have a few that we're evaluating in the pipeline. These come to us from a variety of sources, including final decisions or determinations by enforcement agencies, including USDOL, LNI. And so in those, when there is a final determination, the state workforce agency is compelled to bring discontinuation of services. In others, we have a little bit more discretion, which is something we discuss with our Attorney General's office, so that that's an informed decision. But so far, we have initiated 2. Yes.
Are you allowed to tell us who the final and who is the pending?
Maybe not in the public meeting.
I don't think so, but there is I think, public information request avenue to get that information. Is that fair, Joy?
That's fair.
Okay. Next slide. You'll hear, I think, a little bit later about our work regarding the data collection under RCW 5075. This is from the 2024 session. We are required to report that information to you quarterly, so we'll hear that in a moment. Next slide, please. Interagency coordination, these are all of those MOUs, and actually now, if we need to call them a more appropriate name, which are interagency agreements. And the one is between the National Farm Worker Jobs Program grantee, which is OIC of Washington, and ESD, that was completed. Our field check coordination, we are very close. It's in final review. We just have to add a little bit more language there. I want to go to the bottom. Our data sharing agreement with LNI, our SOW, our SOW, our statement of work is, I think, 1 of 26 in that master agreement. Our part is done, but the whole agreement is not done. So, but in the meantime, we are successfully sharing data with LNI. Temporary worker housing, that process has, I think, identified a lot of gaps in Washington housing code that need to be addressed, particularly for units with 9 and under occupants, RVs used for mobile and range housing. That is a big enough subject that Juan and I will discuss it after lunch. But that is paused only because there's some other likely things that have to happen first, like a potential rulemaking. And I think that is it. We were in the news, of course. I want to put that there. And then Susana and Petra have some data updates that you'll find in the slides. Do you want to highlight that briefly, or do you want to?
Let's go ahead and let the slides stand on their own, and we can take questions if needed. Sure. But yeah, I want to honor that we have been sitting here for 2 hours, and it's probably time for a break. We have lunch outside, which I will bring right back in, so we can take a break. We will get started again, let's say 11:20, but try and keep it brief, and then we can eat while we go into the next section. So Craig will speak right after, and I'm going to bump my comments to the end of the meeting. Give the update. Craig, if you want to give a quick update on your stuff, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Happy to. So I'm Craig Carroll, the Business Operations Manager for our Workforce Services Division. And thanks. So if you can go to the next slide, just so I can talk about some general stuff, please, Vicki. So I just wanted to let people know, I think if you've looked at the reports we sent out the last couple of months between when we met last and now, we have aligned our dates that we're looking at to align with the ASWS. Even though we have different program years, we're just looking at October 1 through April 30th for all of the information that you're going to see. The other thing that I continue to get questions about often is, does our data only reflect our division or all WSD and ASWS? All the data you'll see if you review these slides later are only for the WSD staff. So if you can go to, which slide, 42, please? And in the interest of time, as Joy pointed out, everyone can review the slides later. Yeah, go back one slide, please. I just wanted to highlight this just to show we do continue with our outreach staff in particular to partner with different agencies, OIC, Labor and Industries, Department of Health, and we are providing Wish Attend training to farm workers in conjunction with Labor and Industries. And I did also want to point out that at the beginning of March, our division received a grant from the Department of Commerce related to digital navigation. And one of the areas we're focusing on is the digital literacy gap with farm workers. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on serving farm workers in that regard. And last but not least, you can go to slide 44. So in a previous meeting, I think it was the last time we actually met. Next slide, please. We talked about looking at comparing. Hello? Is there a question?
No, you're good.
Okay. Anyway, comparing the offices, number of MSFWs served with that where workers were requested, because we tended to see that where we served fewer MSFWs in our offices, the request for workers seemed to be higher. And so I compared the data, and there's not really a direct correlation between the two, but as you can see, as the number of MSFWs served in the offices, generally speaking, the number of H2A workers requested increases. But there's some anomalies like Central Basin, for example. And I think more than anything, it's just representing the overall need for farm workers in these different areas. So I didn't really find what I would call a definitive correlation, but as you can see from here, as it does decline, that the number of workers does increase. And for the purpose of being brief, that's pretty much it, Joy, unless there's questions. But I invite anyone who reviews the slides, if you have any questions, please let me know. Please reach out directly if you care to.
Thank you so much, Craig. Really appreciate the brief overview. The other thing that I wanted to do to get us back on track, and I think Dan may have a conflict, so I'm going to switch the agenda around just a touch and give him an opportunity to introduce Arturo as our new state monitor advocate.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. I know we've all been waiting for this for a long time, so I'm super excited to introduce Arturo Espinoza, who is our new state monitor advocate, and I'll do that in a moment. But first, I wanted to speak a little bit to the position. So think as everybody knows, the SMA monitors and advocates for migrant seasonal farm workers. This position is part of the U.S. Department of Labor Monitor Advocates System that aims to carry out requirements of the Judge Ritchie order that I think we're all familiar with. That order established a framework to ensure MSFWs receive services that are qualitatively equivalent and quantitatively proportionate to the services provided to all job seekers. So the core function of the SMA, ART's new job, is to monitor the provision of the services provided to MSFWs, including by conducting site visits, by reviewing data reports, and just by generally ensuring compliance with federal regulations. I think we discussed in this committee before, the Department of Labor finalized some rules back in 2023. Wagner-Pfizer related rules that in part strengthen the role and the status of the SMA. The rules intend to strengthen the provisions of services to MSFWs and to enhance the protections afforded by the Monitor Advocate System. And so the SMA position, in accordance with these rules, has been elevated. So the position, when it was previously held last by Renee Maldonado, was part of the ASWS office. Position had been on a bit of a journey. We have a couple former SMAs in Alberto and Bertha here in the room.
And Ignacio.
And Ignacio, we have three. Sorry, Ignacio. No pressure, Art. Only three of them in here. So in any case, the position was in the Workforce Services Division, but that didn't make much sense given that the position monitors MSFWs who work within that position. When the ASWS office was formed, we placed it in there. There was certainly coordination that has to occur. There's a sort of compliance related culture and line of business in there. But ultimately, particularly with this new rulemaking, we thought as an agency it best to pull the role out of the ASWS office and elevate it within the agency. So this position reports to the commissioner's office, specifically to me on behalf of Cami. And that puts it in line with the Equal Opportunity Officer, another position in our organization and in state workforce agencies across the nation. And the rules from the Department of Labor, in fact, envision, in our case, Art and Teresa collaborating on issues to ensure there's equal opportunity, equity, and services provided to farm workers throughout the state. I think you all know, obviously, Renee has been away for quite some time. And since he departed, the minimum requirements of the SMA monitoring have been done by Bertha, who has sort of stepped in as acting in some sense. And we also have I think as you're familiar with, a workforce monitoring team to local workforce areas. They monitor formula funds I spoke to earlier. They monitor the Wagner-Pfizer program. And so some of their staff picked up the work while we were in this period without an SMA. But we're all super excited to finally have Art in this position. So a few words about Arturo, and then I'll turn it over to him. Arturo, I think perhaps you've all met him before, has been with the ASWS office team for the last few years working as a compliance specialist. Before that, he served in WorkSource Columbia Basin, where he was a local veterans employment representative. And what I would say about that and the connection to this role is when you're in that role or a role like that, you of course get a really good understanding of how our WorkSource system works. You're working in an office where there are MSFWs working as well, in our case in the Columbia Basin area. And when you're a veterans employment representative, you also have to deal with rules and regulations in carrying out that work. So the combination of the ASWS experience and that WorkSource veterans experience I think it equips Art really well to do this job. As importantly, Arturo has really deep roots in the agriculture community. He grew up in a migrant seasonal farm worker family and has worked in the field since one could work in the fields, since he could pick up tools, as he likes to put it. And so, along with the professional experience, that passion for the community, that personal level of connection with farm workers, I think will really help Art really make sure that farm workers have the full access to opportunities, power, and resources that they need to thrive and meet their full potential. So thrilled to have Art in this role, and I'm going to turn it over to him so he can tell us a bit about himself and his vision for the position, and then we're happy to, or Art's happy. I'll sit back and listen to take any questions or comments you might all have. So welcome, Art. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Check. He took my whole. Oh, what he said. Like just like Dan said, I've been working the fields. I have been since I was young. Able to pick up tools in where we lived in Mexico, and then when we moved up to Washington State, joined the military. Well, we left. I did that throughout. Hit high school, graduated high school, joined the military, served my term, got out, came to WorkSource actually in Spokane, participated in what was called the Veterans Program. Got successfully placed. My career at ESD actually started in WorkSource Central Basin, which is Moses Lake. There I was a dual language specialist. I was tasked with anybody that walked through the front door, help them out with whatever it is that they were looking to do. I will admit, my favorite customers were the farm workers, because they'd come in and they'd look at me, and I quite obviously look like somebody that speaks Spanish, right? So they'd stare at me, kind of sizing me up, trying to figure out what to do. I'd let them. And then they'd attempt to say something in English, and I'd reply in Spanish, and I'd get. So those were always the best conversations that I had. I have a soft spot in my heart. It is a core part of my identity, the farm working piece. Very difficult considering of my complexion, and I had red hair when in younger days. So out there in 100-degree weather, that was pretty difficult. But yes, I enjoyed specifically those customers. Yes, I did eventually leave for the Veterans Program at Columbia Basin. But while I did leave for that program, I never stopped trying to collaborate to get MSFW work done. I think Petra Meraz was our MSFW outreach worker. Every time we had an opportunity to collaborate, do outreach together, I was more than willing to help, provide dual language services, all that stuff. She could probably speak to that too. But anytime I had an opportunity, even though I was just focused on veterans, they actually have some of the same barriers to work. That a lot of challenges are the same. Service workers get out. They don't always go into trades, or they don't always want to go into an office environment. Sometimes they look for the solace and the focus that working the land provides them. So Vets on a Farm is absolutely another program that does happen. Those do exist, and so I use that as an opportunity to get out there and collaborate with anything MSFW related. As far as my vision for the position, I got a 30, 60, 90 small goals to meet. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So the 30-day goal for me is, well, I've already started. I think I got a good start. Thanks to Jared and Dan for setting me up, but meeting people within the agency that are going to help me in that goal, to make sure that every MSFW that walks through the doors or meets an MSFW outreach worker either out in the field or in the community gets equitable service across the board, gets the protections that they need, and is mandated by the state. So the 30-day, I I'm well on my way. I'm meeting everyone that can help me to obtain those goals. The 60-day, hope to engage with all of you, if not most of you, by the end of those 60 days. See if, yes, I did work in ASWS, but I wasn't necessarily in a position where I could do something, and I am now, I hope. So I'd love to be able to meet with you one-on-one, see how I could possibly help you in your goals and your vision for what it is that you're trying to do, and see if we can't collaborate. Because in my experience, the best service you can give often comes in partnerships. And then the 90-day piece, I want to have a good understanding of what my core function is. Perhaps follow a couple of other monitors, shadow them, see how they conduct business, and then be well on my way to be able to do the monitoring on my own. With all that said, I'm a very upfront person, so if you ever see me, just say hi. I love talking to people. I love to talk. And I love to talk, and if you let me, I will talk forever. But yeah, what you see is what you get with me. If I don't know something, I'll let you know that I don't know, but I'll do my darndest to find out what it is that you're looking for, answer that question, or find a subject matter expert that can. Same goes on if I can do something. I won't tell you or commit to something that I'm not sure I could do. What I can also tell you is that communication is huge for me. I hated when I was in the, working the front services, when I would do a referral or I had a question and I'd ask somebody in a program or outside an agency and I never got word back with answering that question. So you can expect me to be the change that I want to see. So that's never, well, I am a human, but I'm going to strive to not be that person. I know that was a lot, so.
That's excellent.
That's great.
I also want to point out that you will not be alone in this job. Obviously, we've got the alumni club here in the committee amongst the agency, but you still have ASWS and all of ESBI as partner with Workforce Master. So we got you.
Thank you.
All right.
Just a question. Do you prefer Arturo or Art? I've heard both this morning.
Give the same answer as long as it's not "Hey you," whatever is easiest.
All right.
And I was just reminded there's a fourth, Craig Carroll did the job on an interim basis.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
right. That's
I
right.
think they're being very kind and not starting off with some hard-hitting questions for you.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to working with you.
Likewise.
Welcome. I really look forward to working with you. Just remember, anything that goes wrong, mistake and all that was uncontrollable. The things that went well, obviously, I was working directly with them myself and reviewing it.
All right.
Yeah, brother.
I do have a question in terms of, we have all the alumni here. There's been over the years, in terms of the roles of the MFW, there's some modifications here and there, but what is kind of you guys' vision in terms of what it was 3 years ago to what it's going to be in the future?
How about we put a pin in that and see where we're at in 6 months? What do you think? I want to give Arturo a moment to learn how to spell SMA before we start getting into this.
Okay. Wait, can I, if you don't mind,
Go for it.
Something? Most of what I know about the federal statutes and laws under which we operate, I learned during monitoring. So it's when we have somebody that comes in to look at our program to say, you're doing this well, you're not doing this well, you violated these policy procedures. Those are the moments where we learn and grow. The reason I'm sharing that because we're excited to have you come and look at our American Cinema Farmer program and help us see what are we doing right, what can we do better, what are some of the things that we could be more effective in. And to me, that's the key thing that I'm looking forward to. That's what you can expect. It really is a partnership. We expect you to just be that person that objectively assess our programs and tell us where we fall short so we can do better. So that's
Yeah, I think that's key for the monitor part of the title. And then also as an advocate, we as an agency, with the addition of the ASWS office in particular, really expanded what our presence is out in Washington State. And that is exactly what Arturo's job is, to monitor MSFW work, but also just to sort of be that advocate for the system for farm workers, generally, somebody who has a broad view on what we're doing across the agency in this space. So I think both what is said and that sort of advocate piece combined, I think our Mount Rushmore of SMAs probably have a lot to offer. Each of them also worked at a different time in our agency when we did have less of a, we did have ASWS office to be specific.
I have a question on the title, migrant. So it makes me think of farm workers that are migrating. Is that who you serve? Workers that are migrating. So workers that come into Washington State and leave. Is that the official title of a migrant seasonal farm worker?
So there's the migrant worker part that's a worker that travels from location to location, often crossing state or national borders. And then there's a seasonal worker part. That's a person that's employed in ag on a temporary or seasonal basis, which is mostly ag work, but seasonal. They're dependent on planting or growing, dependent on planting and growing cycles, and they tend to stay in one location.
Right.
So domestic workers is that what?
So it covers local and.
Yes.
Because that's one thing that's changed, right? The number of workers actually migrating. Sure. Okay.
I would say it's simply US based domestic workers that are in Washington State.
Okay, right.
I think by having Arturo in this position in combination with the ASWS office and with the workers that we have in the workforce areas, which that federal title is MSFW, and that also hasn't changed since God knows when. So much about federal law needs to be updated, but that's a different thing. I think what that does is this combination allows us to treat to work with anybody and everybody in the agricultural area in some way. And I don't think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but generally speaking, if Carlos is going to come across someone who he's talking to in the field, the first question is not, are you H2A or are you a Washington-based person? He's just talking to the person. He's working with the person. We'll take counts based on different things, but we're really moving towards a person-based service as opposed to a program-based service. And I think that's part of what we'll be talking about moving forward. Does that help?
I guess, isn't there like some funding that's very specific about what some funding can be used for? Or at least in the past, I've heard of, like services for migrant workers is different than services for farm workers that are. I'm not gonna argue, but I'm just thinking about how this is working out, and it's fine as, I guess I'm just trying to figure out the focus of this position.
Right. I think between Ish and Dan and I, we'll worry about how to marry all the funding together, the different colors of money to make it a good fruit salad. I don't want the staff worrying about those program definitions when they're out serving folks.
I know. So we, farm worker advocates, we worry about it. If it doesn't happen, if there's a gap in service advocacy for certain workers.
Absolutely.
And I think you can't sometimes, and this is why it's been good to have this committee and seeing the access and the outreach. Actually, we see the different types of visits and how many workers are being visited, because I still think that this committee has put so much focus on H2A workers and not enough on domestic workers. And so, how you balance that out so that it's true what you say, that you're just like, it's a worker, right? But we know from past experience, and it's not where we need to be with domestic workers actually getting the services that, the same kind of attention, I guess. So I'm just gonna keep asking, and we're just gonna keep moving forward until, until we get feedback from our community that it's actually there's actually something happening out there in terms of advocacy. State agency.
Ish wants to respond.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for that feedback. I think for us, again, if there's things we can do better, we welcome that feedback as far as employment services. But Arturo knows this very well. The migrant regional farm worker thing is just really which counties are designated. Significant ag counties, that's where we have them. In reality, however, we provide workforce services to anyone. It's not just the 10 MSF that provide that service, all workforce staff provide workforce services to those people. So that's why Dan was talking about the Wagner Pilot program earlier, because that's our universal fund that we use to provide outreach, employment services, business services to everyone. But the migrant seasonal farm work is just more contained to those counties that are designated as significant.
So do you all consider, do you consider H2A workers migrant workers?
So it's.
Okay.
I'm just curious. Okay, well, it depends on who at DOL you ask. So for example, ETA would tell you, that, well, OFLC will tell you, ETA that.
I'm sorry, what's OL?
So Office of Foreign Labor Certification and also, Employment Training Administration, that H2A workers are not eligible to receive Wagner-Pfizer services, therefore they should not be counted in the state's count of farm workers. However,
and I'm sure you told me this before.
I'm sure I've heard this before.
I'm learning too.
However, even though H2 workers aren't like eligible for UI or those types of services that ESD provides, they are eligible to receive services from us regarding complaints, regard those types of things. Those are Wagner-Pfizer services. So we've received different answers to that direct question from DOL. So our approach has been that the education piece, the compliance piece, that's going to be offered to all farm workers, whether H2A or US based.
One last thing I'll add, Rosalinda, all that is true, particularly what Joy was saying about we're thinking about the person, not the program. But I will refer back to the presentation I just gave, and that is to say that we use a fund source, CPP, a state fund source in particular, to supplement shortfalls in federal funding, and that includes employment services generally, and that includes the subset that we specifically use for providing employment services to domestic workers. And the legislature has separately dedicated a specific amount of that money for the activities that Bertha's office carries out. And then big picture, when you're talking about all these things, how they mesh together and how we just think about the person and serving the farm worker as they are and not about a program. In the end, we're tapping the same state fund source to do that. And so in our implementation, we, as exactly as Joy said, that's how we do it. But it is, to your point, distinct in how it's categorized in federal and state budget.
Thank you.
So let me try another question.
Was your first one not successful?
In the structure, can you guys paint a structure of where Arturo is going to be in the agency? So report to you or?
Yeah, everywhere. He reports to me, so that's part of the pulling out of the ASWS office, but B, the rulemaking in the federal rulemaking, and it's me just as part of the commissioner's office. So, like I mentioned, a similar role in the equal opportunity officer. It's somebody with direct access to Cami, and beyond reporting to me, Arturo will meet with Cami on an ongoing basis so that he can report to her what he's independently seeing is occurring in terms of how well we're surveying migrant seasonal farm workers or not. So that's just where he sits in the diagram of it all, but it is again physically out in work source centers, particularly those significant offices, doing the monitoring as Ish was speaking to, and as Joy was speaking to, still connected with the ASWS office, because in the end, from some of those good points, Bertha's team is out there and they're engaging with both domestic and H2A workers. Those are the primary focus, and are finding himself out there and get a complaint from an H2 worker, it's
He's migrating across the state.
right.
Yeah.
It's true. But not a seasonal worker, we're doing it full time.
Oh, yeah, no, it's just 12 months. Yeah, that's right. All right, well, thank you very much, Arturo. We're looking forward to having you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna go back to the H2A TWH inspection changes, Juan and Bertha. You guys, your chance to speak.
Yes, and so I don't want to rush through this because I think in this area particularly, there's opportunity or there's a need for feedback from members, and there's also an opportunity for current and future advocacy in this area. TWH inspection, so just to so we're talking about temporary worker housing in Department of Health's regulations. There's a code, including the standards for temporary worker housing. We're going to be speaking today only within the subset of H2A, temporary worker housing. So as it was brought up earlier today, temporary worker housing could include farm worker housing or utilized by employers that don't have an H2A job order, but we're speaking particularly about H2A because that is the environment in which ESD and DOH coordinate and interact. So I think I'm going to cover the first couple of slides, and then I will hand it over to Juan to talk about DOH specific processes. But the intent here is to give you a high level overview and speak mostly to the general common things and not necessarily to the exceptions. So please keep in mind that there are exceptions for certain housing types, but we want to just give you a look under the hood of what this has historically looked like in Washington, the recent changes to these processes and to this partnership with DOH and ESD, and also what's next, what are the challenges, and most importantly, how you all can advise and help. Juan, do you want to add anything? Or Jerry, Juan and Jerry?
No, I think you did pretty good. We can get started. Thank you, Bertha.
Okay, perfect. So just cover the roadmap. We'll go to the next slide. And so we're going to start really, really high level and talk about roles and responsibilities as are prescribed by law. So in the Code of Federal Regulations, we know that under the H2A program, the employer must provide free housing to H2A workers and eligible U.S. workers. And what that means, eligible U.S. workers are workers in corresponding employment that are working under that job order and cannot reasonably return to their permanent place of residence within the same day. As we talked about in the H2A, H2B context, for H2A workers, that is an assurance the employer makes that they must provide free housing. Furthermore, in that same section, housing must not only be free, but it also has to meet applicable housing standards. And there's a set of housing standards, the federal standards, which we'll talk about in a bit, and also the state standards, and in some circumstances, local standards. So our job at the FLC level is to evaluate that housing, the housings that the employer is proposing, to confirm that they meet all those standards, all the applicable standards, before we can certify housing to DOL. DOL cannot move forward with approving an application until they get the green light from the SWA that housing is in compliance. Next, so the role and responsibility of the SWA, as I just stated, is to inspect and to certify to the employer, excuse me, not to the employer, to USDOL that the housing is sufficient to both accommodate the number of workers requested and that it meets all applicable standards. So that is our charge.
Tisha has a question.
What
Yes,
is the
sir.
SWAT for those who don't know?
Yes, so the SWA is a term in the regulation state workforce agency. In every state it's different. In Washington, the SWA is ESD, Employment Security Department. Next slide.
One question.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't, I may have missed it. Did you say who set those standards?
We're going to
They-
talk about it
okay.
in this slide here. So what are the applicable standards? So the SWA, as I stated, we have to make sure that the housing is in compliance with the standard. And the strictest standard, if there's multiple, applies. So for federal standards, there's two categories. If it's a pre-1980 build, meaning that unit, that facility was built pre-1980, it has to meet the Federal Employment Training Administration standards under that code citation. If it's after 1980, which I would say the majority is, then it has to meet the federal OSHA standards. So then there's state and local standards. In Washington, in almost every category, I would say probably 99% of provisions, the state has a higher standard, meaning that if you meet the state standard, you are going to meet the federal standard. So our standards are in the RCW, the WACS, and there are the citations. Those standards are licensed and enforced. Compliance is enforced by the Department of Health. We don't, the Employment Security Division or Department, we're not, we don't have enforcement authority over compliance of that housing. That's a DOH function.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I can add some to this, thank you, Bertha. So these regulations ensure minimum health and safety standards, and the operators of temporary worker housing that we operate and we work with, the operators must comply for an operating license with criteria based on the number of dwelling units or occupants. And if there's failure to obtain a license or comply with these regulations, it may result in civil fines, penalties, or suspensions of the license. Some of the requirements or some of the housing standards, as Bertha was saying, that are higher than federal standards, some of those include water supply, sewage disposal, electricity, ventilation, and fire safety. And temporary worker housing sites must be properly drained and located away from livestock areas, for example. Some of the other standards that we look at, we have strict guidelines on laundry, toilet, bathing, and food handling facilities to ensure sanitary conditions. We also look at square footage where the beds are placed, storage for personal belongings, and they must meet hygiene and spacing requirements, as well as disease prevention and worker safety. So the operators must communicate any disease to health authorities, as well as community health workers must have access to the workers as well as necessary. Some of the fees and licensing areas that we cover as well. So licensing fees are determined based on the number of occupants and the administrative costs. There's also late fees apply for late applications. Just to cover on that as well. And for the RCWs and the WACs that you have on screen, which is 246358, under 358, to get a temporary worker housing operating license, the housing consists of 5 or more dwelling units, any combination of dwelling units or spaces that house 10 or more occupants. We also, there's housing for 4 or fewer dwellings or 9 or fewer occupants which may opt to comply with the regulations that under the WAC 246358. Also, we have the the housing construction review standards as well under 246-359. And for the construction standards, it establishes a minimum construction standard, which has to ensure health and safety of the occupants by regulating design, construction, materials, location, and maintenance, and applies to temporary worker housing sites as defined on the RCWs that you see on screen, which is RCW 43.70.334 and 43.7340, which requires that temporary worker housing operators need to obtain construction permits from the Washington State Department of Health, and also make sure that there's a square footage requirement that's being met, as well as it requires adequate lighting and electrical systems meet the state code standards, as well as the integrity of the structural integrity, like roofing and plumbing and foundation standards have to be met. Some of the additional requirements under CRS, Construction Review Services, are smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, food handling facilities, heating and cooling systems, as well as temperature, also safe temperature range. Anything else you want to cover on this slide, Bertha?
Can you please, we're using the words operator and then we're using the words employer. Can you explain that sometimes those are the same, but oftentimes they're different?
Yes, so the operator, and there could be multiple employers in one location, depending on what the agricultural setting is. So there can be a particular housing that has workers that work in multiple companies as well, different employers, but there is one operator that is housing all the workers in that facility. We often deal with operators directly, and that's usually the communication that we have when we conduct these health inspections as well. And the different operators that we have at different locations also is they might have different employers.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Hey, Bertha,
Yeah,
can you go back to that slide again real quick? It's Jerry.
sure.
I just wanted to add just one caveat regarding construction review services under 246359, and that is if whether the TWH is located within city limits or outside city limits. Just want to clarify that if you're within city limits, local building department still has enforcement and regulation over that TWH, over that building itself. And they are the ones we require the COO from, certificate of occupancy. However, CRS, Construction Review Services, would still review that building for specific physical requirements, environmental requirements that Juan had shared. I just wanted to clarify that because if it's within city limits or outside city limits. So just a point of authority.
Thank you, Jerry. I missed that. Thank you.
Mike Emperor has a question.
Yeah, I don't want to be premature with this, but what this implies, gentlemen, and you and I have a conversation to have about this in the future, as you know, is that if someone builds in the county, because you're essentially assuming that anything built in the county is a rural work site. That's how I understand this. But if someone wants to build housing that's going to be used as temporary worker housing to the international building codes, which is a more stringent building code, and it's in the county, they're going to have to get probably reviewed by two different entities, by someone who can review to the international building code and to the TWH, or are you prepared at CRS to review and issue a certificate of occupancy for the International Building Code.
Is that a question, Mike?
Yes, it is a question. Are you going to be?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about.
There's
Like, what is the International Building
Yeah.
Code?
Right, the state building.
Oh, that's the state building.
Yeah, that's a state building code, which is
Oh,
more stringent than the temporary. When we
Okay.
wrote the legislation for the temporary worker housing building code, it was to allow housing to be built that was to a code less stringent than the state building code. And in order to save money, because not all temporary worker housing was going to be used year round.
Okay.
And so there was, it's a lesser standard. In the state,
That is correct. That is correct, Mike. It is a lesser standard than the International Building Code, but there are items under 359 that are reviewed that is not reviewed under the International Building Code, such as square footages, the ratio of plumbing, number of occupants per number of sinks, number of showers, number of stoves per number of occupants. The window size is very specific for under the 359, and those items are not identified under the International Building Code, regardless how strict they may be. But it is, like you said, you said it really well, is that it's more like low-hanging fruit. It's easier for compliance for that part. If it's outside city limits, it's going to be a lot easier, I would say, because it's less stringent. If you're inside city limits, you're going to be expected to meet those international building codes based on local health authority, building department. I'm sorry. But in addition to that, still meet the minimum requirements. However, CRS will not be reviewing for construction standards because they will be receiving the C of O from the city or county building department.
Right, but my question is, if somebody wants to build in a rural area to the state building code, are you prepared to issue a C of O under the state building code, or are we going to have to get?
Oh, yeah.
another?
I mean, you can't. Yeah. I mean, you should be able to, but you still have to go to CRS for the other specific requirements that are not applied in the National Building Code. But yes, and it's not us. Again, I'm speaking on behalf of CRS, which is actually a whole different division of DOH. It's not. We're under Environmental Public Health. They're under HSQA, which is a different division. So I can't speak on their behalf. But I would say if they're building the international building codes, that's above and beyond the requirements. However, you will still have to go to CRS to look at those specific physical environmental requirements that are speculated in 359.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, next slide. So what entities are involved in the H2A TWH inspection process? And we're talking about, this is the point where employers file their ETA 790s, and as a requirement of that application, they have to list what housing they are going to use to house the number of requested workers. So that application is filed in a flag system, which is a USDOL platform, and the data is then sent to the appropriate SWA. So at this point, Department of Health doesn't know that that's going to be H2A housing. That communication comes from that communication initially comes from ESD. So as I stated before, ESD as the SWA is really the final decision maker on whether that housing is compliant, not for state law, but for the purposes of certifying that H2A employment certification. It is possible that ESD could certify housing to DOH as compliant, or excuse me, to USDOL as compliant without it having a license. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. ESD, we don't have the housing rules under in we're not we don't have authority to that code. We don't issue fees. We don't license housing. That is a separate process. It is done as between the operator or the employer operator and DOH. But we do coordinate with DOH to determine whether that H-2A temporary worker housing is compliant. And also, if, like, for example, we'll talk about range housing and housing with 9 or fewer occupants in a moment, that is not under the jurisdiction of DOH's licensing rules. And therefore, in those instances, ESD in the past has certified that housing compliance. And we'll talk about our inspection authority in just a moment. But Juan and Jerry, do you want to cover Department of Health's functions?
Yes, so just like I added a little bit earlier, so our functions under our state authority to inspect, operators must comply with operating license if the housing consists of 5 or more dwelling units or 10 or more occupants. Operators with 4 or fewer units or 9 or fewer occupants may voluntarily comply. And these applications must include occupancy limits, water system compliance, and a licensing fee. We also do pre-licensure inspection, pre-occupancy inspections, or participation in a self-survey program. When it comes to housing, as I mentioned a little bit before, the housing must meet the sanitary and safety requirements. And the in general, when it comes to accepting fees, coordinating inspections, we work with ESD. We have a series of not only communications to understand, and be able to enforce if needed. So some of the enforcement penalties, so any violations of the regulations can lead to civil fines or license suspension or revocation. Some of the operating without a license results in assigning fines, as well as the operators. We work with the operators at these facilities to make sure there's cooperation with these health inspections and enforcement. And we have developed a lot of processes with ESD over the last few years to understand what the process is, to understand what are some of the best areas that we need to cover, any areas that we need to improve in communication, which we'll cover more later as well.
Okay, next slide, please. So recent change. So from as far back as I can remember, and maybe it was different, maybe at the very kind of early years of the program, was that those units that will house 9 or fewer occupants, DOH doesn't have licensing authority over that subset of housing. So historically, LNI has done those inspections and communicated that data to ESD about whether that housing is compliant. I also, just to set this up, I also want to state that in about 50% of states in the United States, SWS do their own housing inspections, and we must do that. But in the other 50% of states, of which Washington is one of them, we coordinate or delegate those inspections to the state housing agency and then coordinate communication regarding compliance. Since the 1st of November, LNI has transitioned out of doing those inspections for us. They were basically courtesy inspections. They weren't licensing, they weren't collecting a fee. They still have jurisdiction to conduct post-occupancy inspections once the workers get there, but they're not doing any pre-occupancy inspection work now. So since that time, DOH has assumed all temporary worker housing, including 9 and under.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Are there still housing units that have fewer than 9 that were built before 1980 that only have to meet ETA standards.
Juan, did you hear that?
I did. I'm just trying to determine, I would have to look for that information. We have, since we receive from LNI, this subset of housing, we have about 53 facilities that we've been working with. So I'll have to see which one of those were built before 1980. I don't have
But
that.
it is a possibility, right? It is a possibility.
It's possible, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And also please note that DOH is taking this approach only with H2A PWH with 9 or fewer non-PWH that is not going to be housing H2A workers.
Correct.
So they're essentially filling this gap. Next.
So we take complaints also from workers.
Yes, you retain your
Yeah.
post-occupancy jurisdiction.
Can I ask you a question? What about the sheep herder housing?
We're going to cover that in a moment. That's a different subset under a different regulation, but yes.
Why do you have this?
Because I've had the problem.
And I'm just gonna add, so even though there may be homes built pre-1980 that would be subject to the ETA requirements, when workers are on site, they would still be subject to our requirements.
Yes, you maintain post-occupancy jurisdiction.
Because we have jurisdiction over all temporary worker housing, regardless of.
Makes sense. The federal law only requires ETA, but LNI can require that they meet LNI standards.
Yeah.
As long as it's employed.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, and that would result in that situation where we could correctly certify that housing is compliant to ETA even though it doesn't meet state standards. So we often advise employers or operators, this solves the issue for your certification, but it doesn't resolve your non-compliance with LNI.
But didn't you say at the beginning that you had to show compliance with both federal and state housing requirements?
Yes,
So
but
how does it meet?
And your example only would apply to pre-1980 builds, is that right?
Yes.
So, do we have any, I mean, we would have to look at our
Okay,
data
I'm
to
just,
see
I
if
just
it
heard
is.
two different things. I thought I
Yes.
heard, okay.
Wait, yes, but,
Okay.
okay. So,
Sorry.
so all of you probably lived all of this, and so you remember it, but just very, very briefly. So, so before November 2024, DOH was doing the TWH inspections, and then LNI was doing inspections for that subset of units. Our most recent MOU is between 3 agencies is from 2021, and no consideration, meaning no money, has been exchanged between the ESD and these other entities to be doing this work. In 2023, as I stated earlier, we monitored. Our grant was monitored by USDOL, and they told us that ESD, you need to be ready in case, DOH, LNI has to walk away. You're still responsible for this work. So they encouraged us to make a contingency plan. So in the last 2 years, we have purchased inspection equipment. Almost all of our compliance staff has shadowed either a DOH inspector or an LNI inspector, and we have filled in as necessary to perform those pre-occupancy inspections, although it is relatively rare. So the monitoring report also recommended an exchange of consideration between the entities to give us some security that that inspection coordination would continue. And so and then in the last 2 years, as Juan stated, we have developed processes and procedures that has made coordination standardized, timely, and overall pretty smooth. So the last 2 years, we've had, 1 year, we've had a lot of change. As I said, we trained all of our compliance staff to be able to perform temporary worker housing inspections. DOH also announced that all transient accommodations, meaning the hotel motels, previous hotel motels converted to temporary worker housing, that they would have to meet the TWH standards. In the past, they didn't. So that is a requirement now, and they went on a very good communication tour, on-site visiting all of those operators and advising them of the new of that change. So then in November last year, L&I ceases conducting the courtesy inspections for 9 and fewer. DOH was asked by ESD to support this work, and so DOH directed operators that that the approach would be, if you are going to house H2A workers, you need to apply for a license and go through our process. We've also been updating our housing inspection interagency agreement, but we've got some gaps in state rules, particularly when it comes to mobile or range housing. And this is like sheep herder housing, where we've got those RVs or those trailers that are going out on the range. Under this approach, they have to meet temporary worker housing standards, which means water source, square footage, etc. It's not likely that you are going to get an RV that has higher than a 6-foot ceiling. So if you've got a 6.5 or I think 7-foot ceiling, that's compliant. But we're creating a situation here where there are mobile range units that can never come into compliance with the temporary worker housing standards, but that is the only housing type that can serve these types of workers. And so that is a gap in the state law. And that is a big part of why our MOU has not been completed, because that may involve a rule change from DOH. Juan and Jerry, did I capture that? Do you want to add?
So I would add to that. I mean, there are standards from DOL standards for sheep herders, but are lesser standards, like far lesser standards.
They're very minimal.
Very minimal, almost. Yeah, it's primitive in some cases. And so then we have our standards, which are, I would say, more strict compared to the DOL. So it's trying to find that happy medium between the two, where it's a little bit above what DOL standards perhaps are, and what our current standards are for state for these particular types of TWHs, RVs specifically. And so that's something we are trying to work through. And we understand that a lot of these operators, or I guess employers, how you look at it, they're used to the other standards from DOL, and so they were able to comply. But over the last year or so, it's been different. It's changed through starting with L&I and then now with us.
So are you gonna have a stakeholder process to discuss what this looks like, or? I mean, it seems like there should be. There's an impact, right?
And currently there are about.
I didn't know this was going on, and so I'd like to be involved.
I mean, if we were going to do any of the rules, they would go through the rule-making process, which would, from L&I's perspective, and I'm sure DOH's as well, we typically hold, pre-stakeholder meetings where we kind of broach the subject. At this point, we haven't done anything to file to do that notification of we are opening up the rule. But that would be part of the process to ensure that we do have that.
I mean, one thing I just want to point out is the rationale for having lower standards has been that they take these houses out onto the remote range and they can't connect them to water, right? But one thing I just want to say is not all of them is that the case. And so there's like a goat employer in the Tri-Cities that we had some dealings with that had these horrible leaky trailers. Well, those never went into he just used them because he fell in this goat herder, sheep herder thing, but they were just parked by the side of a field. And so in other words, there's sometimes, I think they're not all, there's this vision of being placed really remotely, but they're not all.
Well, and I also want to say is that the federal rules have a specific section for mobile and range housing with different standards, including caloric standards for for food that's provided to workers. The state standards don't speak to that type of housing. We want sheep herders, sheep herders and range. We want those industries to stay in Washington and be able to expect what's required of them as far as housing standards. And when you're out on the range, an RV maybe is the only appropriate.
Absolutely. I'm just saying they're not always. The range is a little bit of a flexible standard.
We've seen those.
Fernandez. That's all I'm gonna say. Fernandez, where he basically had them right by his house for most of the year.
I think overall that's an exception.
Yeah,
but
I'm
that's
just saying to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
Mike, do you want to?
Yes, a question for Juan and Gerald. So with the new regulations requiring that public accommodations all meet the TWH standards, is there a situation where you could have Best Western that doesn't meet the regulations, and so you couldn't put people up in there, or would it just be a matter of limiting the number of people in the room, or does that ace some public accommodations out altogether?
Well, first, I'll just clarify: there's no new regulations. Nothing has changed at all. What changed was the Department of Labor recognized public accommodations as a way of housing workers. But as far as if a TA does not meet the requirements, let's say, for instance, the window sizing it is not 1/10 of the square footage, which is a physical requirement, which will be difficult for a hotel to go and accommodate, and ripping out windows just so they have a bigger window. Most of them do end up meeting the requirements with some very minor modifications that don't completely require a remodel of the room. So we haven't had too many that have been rejected.
Let's move on to the next slide, just to kind of continue on our high level theme, and then how we are hoping to engage the committee. So looking ahead, we are experiencing increasing housing inspection volume, particularly DOH, now that it is assumed all pre-occupancy H2A TWH inspections. I'll just kind of speak to the ESD specific ones. Also, it is in the best interest to have, it is in the best interest for safe and compliant temporary worker housing to be inspected by the Department of Health. And that's a system that's been in place since the beginning of H2A in Washington, and that's a coordination that we want to continue. The ESD wants to continue, but obviously, Juan and Jerry, do you want to speak to the challenges on your end of providing this service?
Thank you. Well, we exponentially since 2017, housing has grown a lot in the state. So we have seen an upward mobility of housing contracts and more workers. This is the first year that we now added another subset, and the challenges that we're facing are not lack of capacity per se from our program, but we lost an inspector earlier this year. And as I explained, the program has grown. There's more facilities, more employees. We still have the same amount of inspectors. So we are currently recruiting for that one inspector that we don't have since January, despite the hiring freeze. But the lack of capacity, it's basically just because it has grown exponentially. And we conducted, since Jerry and I we became part of this program in late 2021, 2022, we done a regionalization where some of our inspectors we started, slow. We did a regionalization by cross-training our inspectors on not only temporary worker housing, but transient accommodations. That's why our program is called lodging, because we cross-train because we lacked, we needed, boots on the ground. We needed capacity around the state, and basically the fees the operating costs, the fees that we collect are not enough with the capacity. So we've been able to, in the last few months, we've been working on a temporary worker housing fee study to assess our fees. We are looking internally at what the temporary worker housing rule is going to look like, a rule revision, working with LNI on that in the coming months, year. But it's not something that is set, just like it was explained earlier. It's not set in stone yet on dates or anything like that. We're just looking at what are some of the ways that we can improve our program with the 6 or 7 inspectors that we have, with the amount of facilities that just keep adding to our list. And we are grateful to have the amount of inspectors that we have and be able to cross-train them. We updated our temporary worker housing website. We've been doing a lot of innovative ways to do what we can with what we have, but we feel like we've been in a budget deficit basically before the budget deficit even got here. We've been working against the clock. Our inspectors work long hours to meet the demand. But we with the fee study that we have coming up that we're working on, we're hoping to see how this is going to look like. But since I mentioned earlier, we received a total of 53 temporary worker housing facilities with the less than 9 occupants from LNI, but that number can grow or stay the same this year. We don't have the complete data yet.
What I can add to Juan regarding the 53, so far, 62% of the 53 have been permitted through DOH. And I believe about 6 or so are still in pending, which means that the license has been accepted. It just we're still going through the inspection process. And about a dozen or so we have not heard back yet.
So I think in closing, the federal rules require that housing be ready, compliant, and ready for inspection at the time of the filing of the ETA 790. It is not appropriate to file your application if your housing is not ready, because by ready for inspection. If it's not ready, then what that causes is multiple trips by DOH and basically just a waste in resources and a delay of your application, because we can't certify your application for further processing to USDOL until your housing is compliant. I think employers are getting better at that, but please don't file your ETA if your housing is not ready. Petra, is that the general message? Sorry, I wasn't. Don't file your ETA 790 until your housing is ready.
Correct. It won't be certified, and your application will be delayed.
And these inspectors, as Juan says, there's only 6 or 7, so it could be a wait, and and that would not be anything we could help with.
Can I ask one other question about housing? I know we're like, I seem to remember that the last monitoring or something that was done, there was an issue about square footage and whether the Washington standards met the federal standards. Is there any update on that? Are we now at the?
I think that's the Juan and Jerry question.
Do you know what I'm referring to? The square footage requirements?
I know the square footage for our requirements, but I'm not familiar with DOL. I mean, for our requirements.
I'll follow up. I'm sorry, because I know we're behind. I'll follow up separately. Thank you.
I think moving forward, what this conversation looks like is, if our foreign labor certification grant, flat reduces, should consideration be exchanged between ESD from that grant to the Department of Health? Do we need state supplemental funding? We don't know. But we just want everybody to be aware of the need, the volume, and that safe housing is a multi-agency effort.
No, I was just gonna I was gonna make a comment that when we first began, when we first started meeting as a committee, one of the biggest issues that we always talked about was this coordination between the agencies, better collaboration and coordination within all of the agencies in order to provide the oversight. And so I think that whatever changes need to be done, either with budgeting or it's the infrastructure, the governmental infrastructure that needs to be changed to accommodate, I think, the willingness of agency leaders to collaborate. So there's got to be that effort has to be made because it does jeopardize providing the best health and safety, not just in housing, but other issues, right? So yeah, I think whatever you need to do, whether it requires supplemental funding or come up with a plan, I think we need to make it happen, I guess, is what I'm saying. These MOUs, these agreements, these considerations, whatever has to happen. I mean, ultimately, I think there's a lot of policy infrastructure and legislative infrastructure that needs to happen for us to do our work, to meet our mission, I guess, at this committee.
I would 100% agree with you.
So,
And also seeing where we've come in the last 6 years has been really good. And this is a particular one that has been changing around and we are continuing to work on it. I think
it's evolved, right?
It has evolved.
Conversations.
Absolutely. I think I see the emails about the IAA and the way we're working through it several times a week in my inbox as we're working through this. But we did want to give you the update because this is such a vital equation.
One of those areas, if I may, Joy, is our interagency agreement with field checks.
Yes.
Because when we do field checks, the employer is going to get all the matter subject experts from all the agencies involved to support the workers and the employer. So that's a big step forward.
Mm-hmm. Getting that one was a huge step. And that's now normalized amongst our agencies. It's really awesome.
So whatever you need to do to cement it into the structure is important.
And I think, Michelle and I, we've been meeting since 2016 talking about housing, and I just want to call out that DOH has been such an incredible partner particularly Juan and Jerry, in working with us in developing processes and being involved in, so I think coordination between ESD and DOH with regards to housing is better than ever.
That's true.
Well, I think DOH has now just been taking much more seriously farm worker housing and putting more resources, and I really appreciate that. There was a time when it was this tiny program and DOH was kind of like not willing to put any resources into really understanding and focusing on farm worker housing, and I think there's just more attention and a more professional approach to TWH. And the collaboration I see a big difference. I think this is one of the areas that has been the biggest improvements in terms of coordination. But it's just like, and I'm sorry, I spoke because sometimes I'm just taken by surprise when there are these surprise, things that happening that I didn't know about. Well, it just seems like there's always some.
I wonder why.
What?
There's always, if I may,
Conversation.
I was just going to say, there's always something going on, Michelle. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And I would add to what, if I may, just quickly, what Joy and Bertha said, that we are grateful for the opportunity to collaborate. We've been doing the best we can with the resources that we have, making do, and wanted to explain a little bit more. The regionalization project that Jerry and I started never came from our leadership. We created that ourselves, where we saw the opportunity that we had this limited amount of inspectors. I went on inspections with Jerry ourselves. We were not required by our leadership to do that. We went and started going with our inspectors, and we were seeing our inspectors work 14-hour days or longer and to be able to cover ground. And we still were getting at the time, not so much now. We have better communication now, but ESD were calling us. We couldn't make the demand. So we're in a much better place now. We still got work to do, but that regionalization project, it's being used internally at DOH and being highlighted because this is something that we created ourselves to see what are we going to do? We have this amount of inspectors. We need to meet the demand. And then we started cross-training everybody over the last 2 years, and we're fully cross-trained. And we'll continue to find innovative ways, but there's more work to do. So,
All right. One last thing, Juan, Jerry, you were saying that there may possibly, you're deciding whether to go forward with updating the rules in this space. Can we just confirm that if and when that happens, we can communicate to the committee specifically that we're getting that?
Yes, of course, yes. Mm-hmm. We have a new policy team that's looking at all the policies. DOH has a policy to update rules that it recently just kind of roll over of updating the rules every 5 years, or looking at the rules, what needs to be specifically be updated from a definition, or just not necessarily an overhaul of the entire rules. But with this new policy team, we already have a policy advisor that is dedicated to meet with us quarterly, and we're just slowly looking at what are some of the things we'd like to see updated, and we'll definitely bring all the information once we have it. Obviously, we need to be in connection with our LNI partners. We'll bring it to this committee.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right.
Could I just say something, just to say it?
Sure.
I just want, I was thinking about this housing thing and what Berta was saying, and it's like, those of us that lived in farm labor camps for years as children, and the conditions of the cabins that we used to live in, pretty much, 9-10 months out of the year, most of us, that if this type of collaboration and attention had been given to farm worker housing in general, we would be in such a different place, including all of us together, including what's the word, what we had to live with in relation to everybody around our communities, that this is what we deserved, that we couldn't have something better than that there was no attention put to that, whether the water was clean, the bathrooms with the, communal bathrooms and all of this, that there was no attention at all, at least that we saw, or that made a difference in how our lives were molded as farm workers. That seeing this it's very rewarding. And I don't want it to go back. I want it to move forward for farm workers. And that's part of, I think, the creativity and innovation that people like Juan and others can take that opportunity and actually be allowed to create those opportunities to improve people's lives in the farm worker communities. So I just want to say that, because it feeds some of advocates like myself and others, it feeds some of our fire and our anger at the unfairness that my family, my father, and my grandfathers have to live with, especially in relation to housing. Don't even get me started on the wages, but just the housing itself. So I think this is a good moment to thank Juan and Jerry for all your hard work and your ability to create this, to take leadership and make it happen. And you too, to allow it, to happen. So thank you very much, all of you. This is really important.
And if I may add really quick, this is so important that we agencies collaborate. For example, on the meeting that we had with Edgar Franks, I think his name is, we couldn't do anything on the H2B side for the rules, but we definitely stated, we will contact DOH, LNI, whomever needs to be contacted, because if we can't do anything because of our policies or whatever, we can definitely have other agencies, and we all collaborated really good. So
yeah, really important.
Very important.
Okay. We are so far off the agenda, and that is okay. We're going to ask Josh to give an incredibly brief update on the prevailing wage and hand harvester survey, on the theory that the slides mostly stand for themselves. But go ahead, Josh.
Thanks, Joy. So really quickly, can you move the slide next, please?
With regard to the agriculture employer survey, our contract period with our vendor lasted from September 2024 through March 2025. During that performance period, we collected 162 completed survey responses from agricultural establishments. It was administered via phone, web, and paper surveys. And currently, we're in the process of reviewing the data and getting the analysis phase underway. Next slide, please. With regard to RCW 5038070, or the workers survey that came down from House Bill 2226, we began active data collection during February and ended that during April. We spent some time cleaning that data, making sure that it was an easily read format, and generating a report, which was delivered to the legislative committees at the very end of April. We were able to collect 701 completed worker surveys, which was administered via phone and web. Next slide, please. And then finally, the plan for the 2025 RCW 5038070 worker survey. We are currently in the phase of obtaining consent from agricultural establishments across Washington state to be on their property and survey their employees. In addition to that, we're figuring out travel logistics, finalizing instruments, and which modes are going to be the easiest to collect field surveys. We plan during June through August to collect field surveys from blueberry and cherry workers, followed immediately by a phone survey for blueberry and cherry workers, which will run simultaneous to field surveys for pears and apples. After we have the field surveys for pears and apples done, nearing the end of October, we'll begin calling them for phone interviews and finalize the data set during December of 2025 with a hope to submit final reports and data sets to legislative committees during January of 2026.
I have a question. Are you going to do any blueberry interviews in Whatcom or Skagit County?
Yes. So when we're reaching out to these agricultural establishments, we've been taking a very particular look at the geographic distribution of the farms and the likelihood that they would have enough employees to satisfy the requirements under that RCW.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. Any last bits?
I'm sorry, but could you let us know the status of the prevailing wage survey, the employer survey, in terms of when you expect to? Did I miss that? I was actually writing notes and made.
I went over the 2024 employer wage survey.
This happened so fast. I'm sorry.
Two sentences and did not.
I missed it. I'm sorry.
No worries. So
I know it's trying to be quick, but I guess in writing some notes,
I just back up to the.
I missed it.
2024.
The 2024 prevailing wage survey. What did you say about it? I'm sorry.
So we've completed the data collection of the 2024 employer wage survey, and we're currently in the data analysis phase.
Okay.
So we don't have a report yet.
Okay.
No,
and what's
we
the
do not have a report
deliverable? Okay. What are you expecting? Or what's your
timeline?
We're hoping that within the next 2 months, we have something solid to share with everybody.
Okay. All right.
And I'm making note that we will be sure to share links as they become available with the committee as soon as they're available. Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. I think we are going to delay the perspectives on the ag economy for our next meeting. Yes, I know we do, which is why we're delaying. I do want to take 5 minutes of chair's privilege and talk a little bit about some of the things that we've talked about in this meeting and moving forward. First off, 6 years in, I mean, I can remember first meeting you in that room over in Yakima when we were, all of you, when we were putting Post-its on the walls, and it was that at that moment felt like such an impossible situation. And yet 6 years later, here we are, and we're doing amazing, amazing work. And I really appreciate that. And I want to add my thanks and echo everything that Cammie and Dan were saying. I'm also really thrilled that the report that the committee turned out last year became such an actionable piece of the legislative discussion moving forward. I mean, everything that was in that report became the decision package. And that decision package, while not fully funded, was part of the discussion. and we were able to make some progress on those, and we will continue to make progress on those. We also have significant legislative interest in the elements of that DP that were not funded. Earlier this week, Bertha and her team had a meeting with Chair Saldana of the Senate Labor and Workforce Committee, and the meeting went very, very well. She's very interested in the work of this committee, and maybe joining us in future meetings as well. Speaking of joining us in future meetings, there's two things I want to run by the committee for your consent. First would be that statutorily we have our 4 labor members, our 4 business members, and our 4 ex officio agencies that are represented. As we are looking at moving from more the implementation of the law to really effectuating these changes and coming to a holistic view of how we are serving the farm worker community and agriculture community at large, there are a couple voices that I've been considering for a long time we should have at the table, not just visiting and part of the public audience, but at the table discussing with us. One would be Arturo as the SMA. He's not a listed member of the committee, but I think that voice is important to have on the committee. And by the way, all of these I would consider to be additional ex officio voices. A second one would be Maria Sigenza of the Commission for Hispanic Affairs, and that voice that's representing that community here. And the third one gets to the connection with our local workforce development boards. I would like to invite one of the executive directors from the LWDBs to have a seat on this committee as well, and be providing that partner voice. Last fall, when we were talking about what we could and could not do within resources or within what we could do, it occurred to me that the LWDs partner with us in different ways and have different flexibility in how they use certain resources and can provide certain services. And I know especially in the Yakima area, in the South Central area, Columbia Basin, in those areas, they are very interested in partnering with us to serve the agriculture community. And so I think it would be a good idea to have them invited to these committee meetings as well. So that is my pitch. If y'all want to think about it, or yeah.
Question. Do you read your statute to limit the number of ex officios to those specified? Do we have the authority to add other ex officio members of the committee, or they be one-time guests? That's the first question.
Okay. I believe that we can in our charter add that. And if we run into a challenge with that, that's what bill proposals are for. So.
And second, I don't disagree with any of those you suggested. My question is on local workforce development boards. If you invite one to participate on an ongoing basis, are we going to have too much of a narrow regional focus? Do we want to rotate them through for periodic reports versus saying, Amy Martinez are going to be here every time, and we're not going to hear anything from any other part of the state?
Right. Actually, Ish and I were talking about this just a couple weeks ago, and his advice was to have them be on terms similar to what you all have, be a 1 or 2 year term, and rotate through different regions that are of interest. I'd be working probably through the Washington Workforce Association to coordinate that. But yeah, it probably makes sense to alternate that as we go. So
I have to admit that I really have no idea what the workforce development boards do. I'm sorry.
So before I took this job, I didn't know either.
So I really can't say. I mean, I'll leave it to people who know.
So ESD is a member of local workers boards. So I know that it sounds like it's a different entity, but the local boards are, again, under the State Workforce Agency, USD, or under that law, identifies key stakeholders that are public, working with businesses to provide guidance for workforce services in a local area. The state agencies in Washington State that are part of the local boards are GSHS, ESD, SBCTC, and the K-12 system, representing the 4 titles of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. And each board must be business led, so the majority of the members are local businesses. So they come together to provide strategy, guidance, vision over how the workforce system in that local area is structured and how it operates in line with state policies and federal policies. And then those board members hire somebody to act as an executive director. So the executive director of the board is actually staff to the board. They're hired to provide the work and support that board, bring their vision basically to reality.
I think I need to think about it, and I have to go back and discuss with, some of the union leadership and also some of the farm workers in general about what this means to be adding the Commission on Hispanic Affairs. Is there going to be others added? What is their position on labor organizing and the issues? I think I need to think about this.
That's completely fair. That is completely fair. I feel that not adding to the voting members by any stretch. This would just be adding those administrative voices as we go forward and having them be able to contribute to the discussions, especially when we're talking about putting into effect some of what the committee wants to do. That's really
I understand that. I just need to think about it. I also would like, could you send us a list of the actionable items in the report that you think are going into possible policy from the interest from the legislators, I guess? What are the components in the report that you've seen interest from?
We can probably do that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. All right.
I think getting to what Linda was saying, I think a description would help, a written description of what, somebody like Amy Martinez, what is her? I mean, I know what they do and I understand it. And, best case scenario is she comes in and says, oh, wow, I didn't realize all these needs. I need to start changing or strategizing and talking to my board to make sure that we're serving the industry better, that we're serving the farm worker better. That's best case scenario.
Right.
Right.
But they're all different.
And each one reports to somebody else too. So, one workforce council in Bellingham could say, yeah, ag is not really big. You don't really care.
Right.
It's marine time. That's what you really care about over there. So that could be a possibility there.
We could.
But it's still good for them to hear what's going
I
on.
think the benefit that I know that we don't have time, but here's the benefit, another potential benefit. Our programs that we run through workshops primarily provide outreach, case management, and such things. The local boards have the programs that pay for training and supportive services and stipends. So as we're thinking about more robust services, it's always a partnership with them at the local level.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I know we're out of time, but I had two things I wanted to just raise. One is I would like to suggest for later. I think this is too short, too few meetings. I think we went from too many to too few. And I just want to put the voice in that I think maybe every 2 months or something, because I don't know. I guess because we didn't meet since, was it January or
January?
Yeah.
It felt like a really long time and there's so much happening.
Did you miss us?
It's such a great group.
Right, we did.
Like I learn every time. It is really the only forum in which I hear what all the agencies are doing and
Exactly.
what's going
I mean, there's one elephant in the room that I was hoping to hear something about. It's like, what's it looking like in different regions, all of these detentions? And what impact is that having on jobs and farmers? And is that being felt? Is it being seen? Because it's similar to the discussions we had on the pandemic, right?
Right.
COVID. And so, anyway, that was just my thought.
No, and that is a very good question. I think you may be right. And I think especially when we made this schedule, we were not anticipating the chaos at the federal level that we are seeing. And we do have the opportunity to schedule special meetings if needed. If y'all would like, we can add in a special meeting, maybe in a month. By virtually do a 2 or 3 hour meeting and focus on the items that we went flying through today or skipped to continue like the state of the ag economy.
That's probably where
The
that
key
would
one?
go, that discussion.
Okay.
Well, I'll just make a very brief assessment here. Really haven't seen much enforcement on farms and workplaces and agriculture, but I expect that as the season gets going. And
Right.
probably most of the impact has been through fear,
Yeah.
where people are staying home or changing their behavior, that kind of thing. But really, everybody just on the edge, waiting for something.
We've got a lot of detentions, individual detentions,
Yeah,
and of course, a big raid, in Bellingham. But I'm agreeing with you, Mike, that whether it happens or not, the feeling that it's going to happen is enough at this point. But
the feeling that it's going to happen
yeah, you're just
was
expecting-
serious enough that in January, internally in ESD, we started setting up regular meetings amongst us just to make sure that our staff were not impacted in ways that we couldn't prescribe. We, put in special measures to ensure that everyone had some sort of citizenship proof with them at all
Right.
times.
I'm
And
even asking my sons to make sure, because racial profiling, we can stop. So once you're in that detention center, getting out is almost impossible. I mean,
right.
Michael's going into 2 months and he'll be there another month, next 3 months.
Maybe
Hard.
others do exactly, that's what I asked them every single time. To kind of get an overview of what's going on, but related to this also. Kevin, you're the expert in this, the latest bill of authority for retaliation and immigration, so there's going to be also that additional thing that we're gonna have in our toolbox. To address some
And there's
of
the
the-
oversight of the detention center bill.
Well, yeah,
But there's just
but that one does, I think, the way.
That's mostly DOH, although we do have a role in the private detention center bill. We have to do regular scheduled inspections. We conducted one, I believe, last fall, and we'll be continuing to do those on a regular scheduled basis. We've now had an additional facility added, based on the update in the law. Because it sounds broader than just one facility. But a lot of it is DOH. There is the component, we already would have jurisdiction over the employees of those facilities. And if detainees are doing work, then we also have jurisdiction. And I think that's the area where that has changed over time, because there was also I believe it was a state Supreme Court decision that stated that the detainees were considered employees and needed to be paid minimum wage. And so the facility stopped using them as workers because they no longer wanted to pay them the $16.66 an hour, supposed to be like dollar that they were paying. So I believe last time we did not see any detainees working. So from our perspective, we didn't have any additional jurisdiction, but again, there's the DOH component to it as well. And then to Uriel's point on, so 5104 is the immigration coercion bill. That goes into effect on July 1st of this year. So we are actively working on updating our complaint forms to make sure that we have that captured. And essentially, it's, we already have a lot of coverage in the realm of retaliation, but that requires an act to occur, a violation of another protected right to occur. What this does is says, okay, you can now, if you say, I'm not going to let you, I'm not going to pay you overtime, but I'm going to make you work overtime. And if you complain about it, I'm going to report you to ICE. That then creates a complaint in this, under this new realm. So it is a expansion of our current retaliation protections. So we'll be working on that. We did try and get some language added in there to try and prevent those records from being disclosable, because we do kind of have that additional concern of we are going to be receiving information about individuals and their immigration status. So trying to be cognizant of the amount of information that we are collecting, so that if we do get public records requests, we can be responsive, but also understand the political environment of it. There's also another bill that passed that allows individuals to use their paid sick leave to attend immigration hearings. So that's another just general expansion of rights that individuals will have access to. And I believe that goes into effect on the 27th of July.
What's the additional facility that you're covering?
I believe it's called Martin Hall. It's a juvenile detention facility.
Where is it?
Spokane.
Spokane, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it possible, you mentioned those two bills, is it possible in the future to have someone from LNI give a presentation, just a really quick summary of those?
Yeah,
So that
we want that to be an agenda and we can certainly do that.
I think we could.
I'm hoping they don't use their sick days to go to their immigration hearings because they'll get picked up.
Yep.
I mean, the immigration bill and retaliation, I mean, we've had a lot of conversation that, because as Kaylin said, I mean, where is the slippery slope in terms of gathering information that we really don't need in order for us to enforce that laws?
And I think we take that perspective broadly out, not just in that bill, but, generally try not to collect any personally identifying information more than what we need to do our jobs, because we've been very cognizant of that in the past. There was also the Keep Washington Working Act a few years ago that really directed agencies to not share that information. So we've stopped, unless it is a business need, we don't collect things like social security numbers, things like that.
How can you add another facility for oversight? What triggers that?
So it was an expansion of the definition. So they had the definition of private detention facility, and this bill amended the underlying definition to make it broader. So that's how this Martin Hall facility got included in there.
Because of Bellingham, the one in Ferndale's getting pretty big. Facility there. They're starting to hold people overnight.
I guess I would need to know kind of what if it's private, owned by a private
It's
company.
being rented by Homeland Security.
Okay.
Roslinda, we did the legislation that expanded this, and we can talk.
All right.
Antonio and I
Okay,
can talk to you about it.
Yep, thank you.
And we will be working on that. So there are additional facilities that we're not aware of, or ones that open up over time, let us know.
So of interest, could that be done in rulemaking? If there are more facilities?
Possibly, but the facility, the definition depends on the facility being private, and we'd have to just really dig into the facts of whether a facility could be considered private. The feds renting a space probably doesn't do it. Yeah, and so, but that doesn't mean we can't, take another run at Roslinda, but I that's a great question.
Alejandra.
Okay, so I am hearing that we definitely want a special meeting added in the in-between time, maybe between now and our next meeting, which is scheduled for.
Well, actually, our next meeting is in July.
Yes,
That's
the 11th
only
of July.
2 months from now. Do we need a?
June's gonna be crazy. The other option that we have with
I would just, if we're already scheduled to meet again on the 17th and we're meeting in the evening, can we start earlier?
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say, is maybe we have our business meeting in the afternoon and then have our public focus meeting after that. That could work.
Okay, we'll look into that.
We will find a way to massage it and make it all work just fine. So.
Just two administrative things.
Yes.
Suggestion that when you all are putting together the agenda, I think you and your staff are working really carefully to make sure that you're allocating time based on how long your presentation is going to be. And we're such a chatty group. I'd say add 30 to 50% to every topic. And then do we have to approve minutes at some point? I don't know if we didn't do that this time. It's been so long since we had a meeting, it's easy to.
You are very correct. We did not have it on here, and
I don't think we actually have minutes to approve. Vicky, is that right? I know we talked.
Whenever the last meeting was, we should still have.
We'll do it at our next meeting. So we will get that up. All right, let's briefly see if there's anybody who still wishes to make a public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment, including any suggested future agenda items, please state your name and spell it so we can capture it for the minutes, as well as your organization. Your comments are being recorded. However, if you'd like them included in the minutes, please submit them in writing to Vicki Carlson by email. Do we have anyone who would wish to speak during public comment? All right. I'm keeping my eye on the screen, but I'm not seeing anyone taking us up on the opportunity. So with that, I think we will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all very, very much for everything. It's been a great meeting, very, very dull. Please grab food on your way out.